Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of What If Temari Fell in Love with Banished Naruto. If you enjoyed the video then like, share and subscribe for more. So let's get started. Chapter 6. Time skip 3 years. Konohagakure no Sato. Hokage Tower. Hokage office. Tsunade was sitting in her office going through paperwork and had black rings under her eyes from the lack of sleep she had from the stress that had accumulated on her over the years. She was the one who was hit the hardest, with Naruto's banishment in the whole village. She had resorted to Sake as her relief, but that too only temporarily resolved her pain. She had turned vicious towards the council, especially the esteemed elders, or the mummies as she liked to call them. She had tried to change the opinion of the council, but they were firm on their opinion. Along with the Fire Daimyo support, only the feudal lord had the power to overturn the decision to Naruto, but she knew he wouldn't get his hands into such a trivial matter. She was broken out of her musings as Shizune came in saying the council was called. She grit her teeth knowing that those dead weights on the face of the earth would do or say something to completely destroy her already stressed situation. Hokage Tower. Council Chambers. The Konoha Council was called as the clan head sat to the right side of the table with the civilian council to the left and the clan elders at the front. They were all murmuring on trivial things as Tsunade entered, and took her seat at the head of the table with a stern expression on her face. All right, who has called this meeting and why? And trust me, there better be a good reason to this or else I won't be really happy, she said in a cold tone as both sides of the council gulped from her tone and glanced at each other to see who had called the meeting. We has called the meeting, Tsunade, said Kaha, and Tsunade narrowed her eyes at the old coot. It's Hokage-sama to you, esteemed elder Kaha. Remember that or Anko will remind you to know how to address your superiors personally. Now may I know the reason for this urgent meeting that you has called us here for? She stated coldly, and the council was silent as everyone knew how vicious she had turned after the banishment of the demon brat. Kaha sweated at her tone and threat and nodded. My apologies, Hokage-sama, but we have some important information and some situations we would like to address with you, said Kaha, and Tsunade nodded, motioning her to continue on as she spoke up. As you know, Hokage-sama, since the last year, our alliances with the Wave and Spring countries has been in turmoil for the past 2 years, and now they have finally broken all alliances, as the 3-year trade alliances with them came to renewal. They completely rejected them and has allied themselves to Suna now completely, and they has said too has gained an even better alliance contract than us, said Kaha as Tsunade raised an eyebrow at her words. Oh, how so? Asked Tsunade curiously, and Homura spoke up this time. Earlier in our alliances we were allied only for mutual trade contracts. It was a give-take sort of a relationship. They supplied us with their resources and we compliantly to the contract supplied them with the native resources of the Land of Fire, he said, and Tsunade nodded, already knowing it as he continued. But their alliance, the Suna, is completely different. Since Suna isn't as rich in the native plantations that we possess, they have decided to give their own resources in return, he said, and Tsunade looked at him confused. And what is the problem with that? She asked, and Kaha replied. Since Suna is mainly rich only in metals or precious stones, they has put in the alliance to give those to them at a lesser price, getting their resources in return for the reconciliation, said Kaha, and Tsunade understood everything. Suna gained resources and even managed to sell them their own, while the Leaf only exchanged them at the exchange price laid down in the alliance, which gave Suna the deal in which they could manage their own prices, which meant Suna had complete control. Homura, however, continued. Moreover, Spring and Wave has put a term in the alliance that Suna will provide them with the military might they need, making them the only village that gets their contracts for missions as well as the other employers who they work with. The daimyo is pretty angry at losing such precious alliances with us, and after hearing the benefits of the alliance that he could has gotten and is demanding answers. Homura finished, and Tsunade had to say that it was quite a great deal. Suna must has had a good negotiator to pull off such a great deal. Well, that is bad news that we has lost such great allies to trade alliances, but it's nice that they haven't been lost towards one of our enemy villages. Any idea on why they would have decided to end an alliance with the Leaf? She asked as the elders glanced at each other for a moment before shaking their heads, and Tsunade had her eyes narrowed. They knew something but weren't telling her, so she decided to ask about dismissing the council when, much to her least favorite person on the council spoke up. Actually, Tsunade-sama, there is one more issue we would like to discuss, said Danzo, and she motioned for him to continue on. We has come across some information about the new security system employed by the Sand Village, he said, and her eyes narrowed. And how exactly would you has come across some top secret information about a village's internal security system? She asked, and he cursed under his breath. He had slipped up and now she was on to him. That's not important, the issue at hand is, he said, and she motioned for him to continue as he had dodged a bullet, but she kept it in her mind to look into the matter later. They have erected a new barrier system that is in many ways similar to our own, he said, and the clan heads protested that they must have stolen it from the Leaf, but Tsunade told them to calm down and listen to the man as Danzo continued. It couldn't have been stolen from us since it is a much better system than us, he said, and the room became deathly silent. Their internal security system was the best and the Leaf prided themselves in it. If Suna had created an even better security system, then that was news to the world about the might of the village. Our system only tells us if a shinobi has entered the village or not, but their system allows them to instantly become alert in case of a breach and locate the intruder. Since the whole village's people's chakra signature has been added to the system, making it almost impossible to breach Suna. They has made their village into a fortress. They can see the world, but the world can't see what's going on inside their village. Their system is unbreachable, he said, and the whole council was at a loss for words. It was truly a remarkable system to has to the village, making it impossible for any spies to get in. Moreover, in the previous few years their quality of sealing equipment has increased dramatically. Their exploding tags are much more powerful than before, at almost thrice the strength of our own. And their other sealing equipments, too, has increased in their complexity, much more dramatically. He finished, shocking the council once more. Looks like this is all the work of someone who possesses excessive knowledge of Fuinjutsu, said Shikaki, and everyone nodded in agreement. But how Suna was never known for its sealing arts. Lady Kyo was their last seal master and she doesn't even hold a candle to Master Freya in sealing, and he is just a level 8 seal master. Plus, where did they gain the knowledge of such high-level Fuinjutsu to train such a great seal master? Said Hayashi, and everyone nodded again. To make that much of a difference in such little time was unexpected and the work of a true seal master. But how could it be? Our seals were handed down to us by Shodame-sama himself, said Shikaki, and Tsunade snorted as everyone looked at her curiously. Please, my grandfather wasn't a seal master at the level to create such high-quality seals that has been handed down to us, she said, and everyone was confused, and Tsunade continued. All of our complex seals were handed down to us by my grandmother Maito Senju, formerly known as Maito Uzumaki of the once great Uzumaki clan of Uzushigaku no Sato. The barrier system was a gift from the elders of the Uzumaki clan, as a tribute to the alliance formed between Konoha and Uzu through the marriage of my grandparents when the two royal families joined together. The symbol of a spiral we wear on our backs is the clan symbol of the Uzumaki clan to honor the alliance formed at the foundation of Konohagakure no Sato. It has all been recorded and kept safe in the Senju history archives. She finished, and everyone was stunned that what they all believed all this time was wrong. Wait, then why don't we know about all of this? Asked an angered Hayashi, and Tsunade smiled sadly. During the start of the Second Great Shinobi War, Uzu was attacked and destroyed by a joint effort of Kiri, Kumo and Awa due to the fear of the Uzumaki clan and their prowess in Fuinjutsu. They sent for help to Konoha, but we didn't have forces to spare, and until the time help reached, Uzu was already in ruins. The whole village was wiped out. My grandfather and granduncle, feeling the shame at not being able to save their family, were so guilty that they removed all records of the clan, to forget the shame that Konoha felt at the time. I know it since the Senju and Uzumaki were cousin clans tied through blood, and all records are kept in the Senju family archives. She finished, and all of them sat silent, taking in the information, as not even Danzo knew the truth that the Uzumaki and Senju were that closely related. Hey, wasn't Naruto an Uzumaki? Was he related to the clan? Asked Shikaki as he remembered another Uzumaki before him. Kushina was her name if he remembered right, he thought, and Tsunade shook her head. His heritage was known only to the Sandaime, and he took it with him to the grave. Only Naruto himself knows of it, because the Sandaime left him a sealed wooden box telling him about it, which I handed over to him at the time of his banishment. It could just have been a way for the Sandaime to honor the once great clan or something else we shall never know. She said sadly as the memories of him returned to her and her heart ached. She missed her idiotic blonde and his ever-present smile. Shikaki was remembering the tomboyish red-haired girl and remembered who she was always around with. His eyes widened suddenly. Blonde hair, cerulean blue eyes. No one else had those exotic features. So that's why he chose him to seal the Kyubi. He was his own son. Tsunade saw the expression of realization, shock and horror on his face and was curious as to what had Inara so worked up. What's the matter, Shikaki? You have something to say, she said, and Shikaki stared at her for a few moments before he sighed and shook his head. No, Tsunade-sama just remembered something about my wife, he said as several clan heads snickered, and Tsunade knew he was lying through his teeth immediately. Shikaki knew that anything about it now was a waste of time. The boy was most probably dead by now, since there had been no news of him in the past 3 years and the way of his banishment left very little chance for his survival. They had driven away the prince of the village with such royal blood without even realizing it. He decided to drop the moot point since it was too troublesome to now. So Tsunade-sama, what are we going to do about it? Asked Homura, and she looked at him confused. Do about what? She asked curiously as the elders were shocked. About Suna, of course. Something must be done about them, said Kaha, and she was even more curious now. I'm sorry, I don't really follow you, said Tsunade, and now they were flabbergasted. What do you mean they are getting too powerful? We must do something, said Danzo in outrage, and now Tsunade was enraged. We will do nothing of the sort. They are the only major village which is completely neutral to Konoha, and the Kazekid is coming in a few days to make the final negotiations of the alliance propositions with us that the Suna Council has been delaying for the past 2 years. Now that I know their strength and the alliances they hold, I want to make this work even more, she said calmly, and the whole council nodded as all of them except Tsunade were thinking of ways to get their hands on the power that Suna now held and to form an alliance with them that was solid enough to last and get them something in return. I has an idea for the alliance to work and last long, Tsunade-sama, said Danzo, and she grimaced inwardly, already knowing it to be something ugly, which would make her throw a fit, though urged to him to go on. Why not forge an alliance the same way your grandfather did with Uzushigaku no Sato? He asked, and she rose an eyebrow at that. A political marriage? She asked, and he nodded. But for that to even be considered, both parties must has important figures of their village to be married. Who do you has in mind? She asked, though she already had an idea who it would probably be from the Leaf. Danzo smirked as he answered. Why not propose a marriage between Sasuke Uchiha, the last Uchiha and Sharingan holder to the Leaf, and Temari no Sabaki, the daughter of the 4th Kazekid and the sister to the 5th. It should hold the alliance firm, and we benefit with a strong Kunoichi from the sand with royal blood, and she would be a perfect bride to Sasuke, as he too desires a strong and powerful wife to rebuild his clan, he said, and she nodded, though Mabuki Hano was seething at the idea of someone other than her daughter marrying the last Uchiha and losing her chance at gaining respect in the village. But why would they even consider sending her to our village? What do they gain in return? She asked, and Danzo answered. They get a strong alliance and the support of the Leaf, the loyalty of the Uchiha clan, as well as the hand of the Uchiha heir in marriage. That should definitely be enough for them to be convinced, and we even say that she gets dual citizenship to both villages so that she could go back to her village anytime she pleases. And imagine if any of her children managed to get the power of the Viton Kektenkai that runs in the blood of her family, we might get the Kektenkai that 3 of their Kazekages are feared for. And that coupled with the Sharingan will make the Uchiha clan even stronger than before, he said, and the whole council agreed, seeing the advantages they would gain as well as the Kektenkai they might get. Tsunade though scowled at the idea of breeding children to Kektenkai, though knew that it was a political matter and her own opinion didn't matter. Alright, I'll talk to the Kazekid on this matter along with the rest of the matters concerning the alliance, and we'll see what comes out of it, she said, though she inwardly wanted to castrate that cripple for even suggesting such a disgusting thing. Alright then, is there anything else you wish to discuss? She asked, and they shook their heads. Then the council is dismissed, said Tsunade, and they all left. Tsunade walked into her office and plopped down in her chair and poured herself some sake. Tsunade-sama, what do you think would happen with the Sand Village? Asked Shizune as she knew why Tsunade was drinking sake at this time. The issue of Naruto that was picked up at the council was always a difficult thing for her. I don't know Shizune, I haven't met Gaara at all in the past few years. Their village was always sending a delegation in his place, and ever since Temari quit being the Konoha Suna official ambassador, the talks for the alliance has been pretty much at a stall, but with this meeting the issue will be made clear once and for all. Plus, the upcoming Chunin exams are being co-hosted by the Leaf and the Sand. The first two phases will be in the Leaf, with the third part being hosted by the Sand. This will give us the time to complete the talks, she said, and Shizune nodded as she went about to get the work of the office done. Tsunade wondered where her blonde little Buki was, or if he was even alive. She had sent several Unbu over the years on his trail, but all had returned without a trace, saying he was now most probably dead or captured by some enemy village, and most probably has his beast extracted and his body experimented upon. She wasn't ready to believe that her Naruto could be dead, and a tear rolled down her eye at the guilt she felt at not being able to do anything for him. Konohagakure no Sato. Barbecue place. The Rookie 11 were gathered at the barbecue place along with their friends and were sitting there, but there was only one person missing from the group, Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke had gotten even more of a loner ever since he was brought back by Naruto and had his curse seal removed by Freya even after many of his protests. Shikamaru was sitting there with a thoughtful expression on his face, and Ino decided to question it. "What's the matter with you, Shikamaru?" she asked, and he looked at her surprised, not even noticing that he had spaced out, and sighed. "Nothing, just thinking about the delegation that is about to come from the Sand. This year Leaf and Sand are co-hosting the Chunin exams with the first two parts here, while the third part is in the Sand. Just wondering, who will be in charge of it from their village?" he said lazily, and she smirked. "Why want that Sand Princess Temari to be the one?" she asked in a sly tone, and he threw her a glare. It was a touching point for him, and everyone knew he liked her, though she hadn't responded to any of his advances at all, and that confused him to no end. "You know that she doesn't want anything to do with me, she made it pretty clear, the last time we met a couple of years ago," he said somberly, and she nodded sadly, remembering how he was burnt off when he tried to ask her the reason for her affection, and she had all but given him the cold shoulder. She decided to change the topic and turned to her friend Sakura, who was just quietly playing with her own food. "So Sakura, has Tsunade-sama agreed at taking you on as an apprentice?" she asked, and Sakura frowned. "No, she has told me that she won't take any apprentice from the Leaf Village, since she doesn't find anyone worthy enough in her eyes, and told me to continue working at the hospital on my own," she said, and Ino nodded. Everything she spoke was getting everyone in a bad mood, she mused. "Hey, has you heard about the broken alliance of the Wave and the Spring Villages?" asked Nevi, and they all nodded as Sakura grimaced and put her spoon down as Hinata looked at her confused. "Sakura-chan, is something wrong?" she asked with her usual stutter, and Sakura looked down at her plate. "Yes, it is most probably due to Naruto," she said in a low voice, and everyone was saddened at the way they had treated him all those years ago. None of them other than Sasuke and Sakura had wanted the boy to get banishment for his mistakes. Everyone knew how much Sakura missed the blonde, especially after her last encounter with Sasuke. No one knew the details of what had happened, but Sakura had lost her crush and had been depressed about Naruto leaving, and had regretted her words to him that she spoke at the time of his leaving. She missed the blonde and his cheerful attitude, as he always tried to cheer her up when she was down by asking her for a date, and then would even take her lashing just to make her feel better. She despised her own fangirl attitude that she held all those years ago, and when she came off her high from Sasuke and her fantasy world, he was long gone and missing from her life. Hinata too missed the blonde and wished she had the courage to go against her father, and at least meet him one last time, before he had left to confess her feelings for the blonde. Everyone else too regretted their last words to the blonde boy and wanted him to come back, though knew there wasn't even a chance of that since he was most probably dead now. Sakura had asked Tsunade if she could go and find him, but had got a serious lashing being asked if she hadn't already done enough, and now she couldn't leave him in peace even after he was gone. She had cried and ran to her home and had kept herself locked up for 2 days before returning to duty. Shikamaru regretted his last words to his childhood friend and thought of how stupid he was to take out his frustration on him even though he brought Sasuke back. Sasuke had all but cut off from the group, saying they only tied him down and had a foul mouth and an even more arrogant attitude since the villagers treated him like a prince to keep him loyal to the village and had Kakashi now as his personal trainer. He had been promoted to Thunin himself, giving him even more arrogance than before, as the council wished him to be as loyal as he could and give him the facilities he needed with the rank of Thunin. Tsunegaku no Sato. It was a bright and usually hot day in the Sand Village as Temari walked through the village in her usual attire. She was wearing her purple battle kimono, and dark purple skirt slit from both sides, showing her toned thighs, one of which had fishnet covering it, with her other calf doing the same, and was wearing an unbu armor over it with a scarlet sash on her waist. See story icon for reference. She was walking to the weapons shop to get her battle fan back from maintenance, when she felt two arms wrap around her waist, and a pair of lips on her neck as she moaned and melted into the loving embrace of the man she loved so much. "So where are you going, Haim?" asked a husky voice nibbling her ear, and shivers ran down her spine as she turned around and gazed into those loving cerulean pools that she loved so much. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and softly pressed her lips against his, not caring the least about the people, watching her as she broke the vental kiss off, rubbing his whiskers with her hand softly as he leaned into her hand, making her smile. Naruto stood there at 6 feet taller than her by 4 inches and a lean, athletic build with his hair shadowing his eyes, giving him a mystifying look. He was wearing a light grey cut-sleeves shirt and a white full-sleeves jacket open in the front with blue unbu pants and fingerless gloves with metal back plates and matching sandals to go with them. He wore his beige hip pouch and white kunai holster in the usual way, and the Suna metal plate stitched on the jacket on his right arm under the Namikaze symbol and the Uzumaki swirl on the other arm. The most striking feature were the blue flames at the bottom of his jacket that accentuated his clothes. Temari traced her hands on his firm chest and put her head on it as he wrapped her up in his arms, and she melted in the embrace, and he disappeared in a water sunshine. He came back up to the top of the highest tower nearby and sat her down on his lap in the shade, and she snuggled in his arms. "Miss me, Haim?" he asked, softly brushing her hair as he opened them of their bindings to let them flow freely and ran his fingers in them, and she nodded, hugging him. "You were supposed to come back last night, and here you are coming half a day late," she said in a mock, angry tone, and he smiled and kissed the top of her head softly. "I'm sorry, Haim, but there was a problem in the barrier and I had to go check it up. Some idiot tried to improve it but instead ruined the stability of the seals. As soon as I left I came to you without reporting the success to Gaara," he said softly, making her smile as she looked up and pecked him happily. "Well, you did the right thing. I have to go to Gaara too, so let's go together," she said, and he smiled and nodded as he kissed her neck and pulled her kimono sideways, licking her collarbone that she was so sensitive to, and she moaned softly, running her fingers through his hair. "Naru-kun," she moaned, and he smiled and gave her a gentle kiss on her lips and fitted her kimono properly, smiling at the pretty pink blush she had on her face. She started to tie her hair again as he caught her wrist, and she looked at him confused. "Let them flow in the wind, Haim. You look pretty that way," he said softly, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear, making her blush intensify as both stood up. He wrapped her up in a hug and both disappeared in a swirl of water, going to the Kazekage Tower after heading to the weapons shop and having some lunch at his house with his Haim and her some alone time. Kazekage Tower. Kazekage office. Gaara was going through the paperwork and was frustrated to no end. Ever since some idiot tried to show his sealing prowess with modifications to the sealing barrier and had disabled it. The council was in an uproar, and every 10 minutes some official would come and ask him about it, and it was now getting frustrating. He had sent Naruto to deal with it, since he was the one who designed it from the ground up, and he was supposed to report to him 2 hours ago, but there was no sign of him, and he wasn't with the barrier team either, and he was dealing with those idiot counselors and paperwork and was almost considering killing the whining fool in front of him with his sand. "I'll send a message as soon as Naruto is done with the barrier repairs," he said calmly, hiding his frustrations, and the man smiled and left after thanking him, and another knock came to the door and his eye twitched. If it was another man who was here to whine about the barrier who had nothing to do with the damn thing, then there will be blood. "Come in," he said stoically, and in walked Naoto and Temari as he saw his sister's hair opened and flowing and her lips were a bit swollen, and turned to Naoto, who apparently had some pink lipstick on his neck that he hadn't noticed but put it aside, knowing what the two had been up to. Azumaki, you were supposed to report to me 2 hours ago, after you left the barrier team. I have sent 3 UNBU teams to you, but there has been no news. He was cut off as the UNBU teams appeared in the office and bowed to him. Kazekid-sama, looks like Naoto Azumaki has left the village. We couldn't find him anywhere, the leader said, and his eye twitched as he pointed to the man standing in front of him, who had an amused smile on his face while Temari was giggling. The UNBU smartly vanished the office as Sand had appeared where they were a moment ago, and he turned to Naoto, who still had that infuriating smile on his face that made him restless. Where were you, Azumaki? I has been answering those damn council fools about it for the past 2 hours, who apparently had nothing to do with this matter, and you has apparently left the barrier team on time, but are coming 2 hours late. So I ask again, where were you? He asked, annoyed, and Naoto put his finger on his chin in a thinking pose. Well, let's see, I was coming to you when I met Haim and we caught up with each other since I had not been able to meet her last night, he said calmly, pointing to Temari, making his eye twitch. Then we went to get her fan from the weapons shop, then we got hungry and I made us some lunch and we ate, and then, well, we had some alone time. He finished, making Temari blush as she traced her finger on her lip, thinking of the makeout session they had. Gaara's eye was twitching dangerously as he listened to his lame excuses for coming this late to a report. So you were doing all those things while you had to make an important report to me, am I right? He asked, and Naoto nodded. You do know that reporting to the cave of the village after a mission is mandatory? He asked sarcastically, making Naoto smile. So I've heard, he said nonchalantly, making Gaara's fingers twitch, and he had to control the urge to punch him with a sand fist, but knew he would never catch him in time, and he sighed, pinching his nose in frustration as Temari giggled. Azumaki, I swear you'll be the death of me someday, so I assume the problem was fixed? He asked, hopefully, and Naoto nodded with a smile, making him sigh in relief as he turned to Temari for the important matter he had to discuss with her. Temari, I'm sorry, but there is a mission of negotiation I has that you won't like, he said, and she looked at him confused. You will be coming with me to Konoha for the final negotiations on our peace treaty. You are the best negotiator we has, and your knowledge in politics is unparalleled as shown in the previous 2 alliances, he said, and her eyes widened as she turned furious and was about to retort when Naoto put a hand on her shoulder and gave her a smile and shook his head. Haim, don't let your personal feelings come in between. What's in the past is done, plus it is only a one-time deal, right? He asked Gaara, who didn't answer, making him raise an eyebrow and Temari's anger to rise. Well, she has also been appointed as the liaison between Suna and Konoha for the upcoming joint Junin exams, he said, and she looked at him incredulously. You can't be serious, she shouted, and he nodded, showing his firm resolve. It is the order of the council and your cage, you cannot refuse this mission, he said, and her eyes widened as she stormed off the office, slamming the door behind her, making him wince, knowing he would pay for playing the rank card later, and turned to Naoto, who was looking at him with confusion. Gaara, you shouldn't have forced her like that, we could have convinced her peacefully, he said, and Gaara shook his head. No, it was the only way. Anyways, I wanted to take you as my personal bodyguard, but we couldn't let you come to Konoha, and at least one of us must stay in the village, as we don't want it to appear too weak, though I trust you with my life the most, my friend. So I'll be taking Kankuro instead, and I hand over my military powers to you while the diplomatic powers are handed to the council. The whole council has agreed to my decision as well, he said, and Naoto's eyes widened. To give him military control of a shinobi village was essentially naming him a temporary cave, and the whole council trusted him enough. Gaara saw his face and smiled a bit as he stood up and put a hand on his shoulder. Azumaki, we both know you has always been the stronger of the 2 of us, and you has gained a lot of influence and respect in the council over the years with your contributions to the village, by giving us your clan seals and helping us forge alliances, and your loyalty to me still remains unquestionable. Let's see how you do as a temporary Kazekid in my absence. I couldn't find a better person to hand the power of the village in my absence. You are my right hand and my brother in all but blood, he said, and Naoto was stunned at the trust and acceptance the village and Gaara showed him and couldn't find the words for the situation that had arisen now. He couldn't comprehend the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders and his mind was spinning. Gaara squeezed his shoulder, making him look at him and gave him a curt nod. Don't worry Azumaki, you are only in charge of the shinobi and the rest of the affairs will be handled by the council. It is only for a few days. I know you'll do fine. You has never disappointed me and I know you won't this time too. Now go and check on Temari, I am worried about her. He said, and Naoto nodded, immediately forgetting all about the situation as his thoughts turned to his love and he rushed out of the office to find his Haim. He forgets all about the pressure of being a temporary cave because Temari is troubled. That idiot never ceases to amaze me. He thought, returning to the bane of his life paperwork. Chapter 7. Sunegaku no Sato. Naoto got out of the Kazekage Tower and started searching for Temari. He looked everywhere from the Sabaku estate to all the spots she hung out at and was now getting worried. He frantically searched for her everywhere as the sun was going down and now his heart was racing fast, thinking something might have happened to her. He rocked his brain for where she might have gone off to, when his brain suddenly clicked, and he rushed to the cave where he took her for his first date and rushed there. He entered the cave and started looking around as he saw her there sleeping, leaning against the tree with Kiara sleeping beside her, and sighed in relief. He slowly walked up as Kiara heard footsteps and opened her eyes to see her summoner, and he put his finger to his lips telling her to stay quiet and sat beside his princess. He gently put his hand beside her head and put it on his lap as she wrapped her arms around his waist and snuggled in his stomach in her sleep, making him smile. He saw the tear marks across her cheek, and knew she had been crying as he ran his fingers through her hair and gently laid a kiss on top of her head, and she smiled in her sleep and snuggled further. He kept rubbing her head for an hour, as her eyes fluttered open and she saw that she was sleeping on something very comfortable and warm and knew what it was as she tried to get away by sitting up. But Naoto pulled her to his lap, and gripped her tightly, burying his face in her neck as she struggled in his grip. "Let me go," she said angrily, and he kissed her neck softly, making her struggle a bit less, and started laying kisses and licking her sensitive skin softly, as her struggle ceased and she tilted her head sideways, and pulled his head closer by his hair. "Let me go, Na-kun." She moaned and tried to resist half-heartedly, and he smirked, pulling her kimono sideways and bit her collarbone, gently drawing a bit of blood as she gasped. "Na-kun." She moaned in pleasure, as he softly licked the mark clean of the bit of blood and laid soft kisses up her neck, going to her ear as she pulled his head closer, letting him have the access he needed, and he gently kissed and licked her ear, nibbling it softly, getting another soft moan from her beautiful pink lips. "I'm sorry, Haim," he whispered, and buried his face in her neck, taking in the scent of her hair, and she smiled as he took her anger away and ran her fingers through his hair and closed her eyes as he held her tightly close to him. "If you didn't agree with me, at least don't agree with him," she whispered softly, and he nodded and softly kissed her neck, making her smile. "I know, Haim, but it was an order from the council. You would have had to do it either way, so I tried to convince you. I wasn't going against you," he said softly, and she smiled and nodded. "I know, I just got angry thinking of that stupid village and needed to vent my frustrations," she said, and he nodded as she saw the state his clothes were in since she left him and was confused as to why they were in such bad shape. "Why are your clothes that way, Na-kun?" she asked, and he sighed tiredly in her neck. "I was worried sick about you, Haim," he said with a sigh, and she was confused as he continued. "You ran away angry and I knew you were about to cry, and that was why you ran away. I searched the village top to bottom for 2 hours and still didn't find you. I was scared something had happened to you," he whispered, and tightened his hold on her, making her gasp at her stupidity. "This was the last place left, and if you weren't here, I would have torn this village apart top to bottom to find you," he whispered as she felt a tear on her neck and knew she shouldn't have run away like that. "Don't run away like that again," he whispered, kissing her neck, and she nodded. "I'm sorry, I was just too," she said, but was cut off as he pressed his lips on hers in a gentle kiss and gave her a smile. "I know," he said softly, putting a lock of hair behind her ear, and she smiled and nodded as he suddenly lifted her hand and kissed the back of it and looked at her curiously. "Haim, do you love me?" He asked, and she was confused at the sudden question but answered nonetheless. More than you could ever know. She whispered, softly rubbing his cheek as he leaned into her touch, making her smile. Do you trust me? He asked, and she answered wholeheartedly. More than I trust myself. She whispered softly, and a small smile lit up his face. Will you be with me? He asked, and she smiled. I'm already yours, my ball of sunshine. She whispered, and he smiled, genuinely happy, and suddenly slid a platinum ring in the shape of a nine-tailed fox with a red ruby in its eye and the third finger in her left hand, and she gasped as she looked at him with tears in her eyes as he gazed at her lovingly. Then marry me. He whispered, and she threw herself in his arms as he caught her in his arms, and she cried in his chest. He smiled softly and rubbed her back gently, trying to soothe the hysterically crying girl. And here, I thought you would be happy for getting the ring. He said playfully, and she giggled as she hit his chest lightly and grabbed his collar of the jacket and smiled. Barker, shut up and kiss me, she said, and pulled him to her as she captured his lips and pushed her lips to his with all her might. She licked his bottom lip softly, and he opened his mouth, and she pushed her tongue in, exploring his caverns completely, and Naoto saw that she was trying to show what she felt, and let her do what she wanted, and gently massaged her tongue with his own, and she moaned in the kiss as she put her hand on the back of his neck and pulled him close to her, deepening the kiss. Naoto's eyes glazed as he had never felt her kiss him so passionately before, and as she broke off he saw her tongue a bit red with blood and trace his finger on his lip, seeing she had bitten him slightly, and saw her panting, gazing at him lovingly. She dove on again this time. She caught his bottom, bleeding lip in her own and sucked on it softly, making him grunt in pleasure as she broke off after a couple of minutes as he brought her close and put her head on his chest and his chin on her head, running his fingers in her hair as she sighed happily. Haim, do you think I proposed a bit early? He asked nervously after a few minutes of happy silence, and she looked at him with an amused smile as she wrapped her arms around his neck, and their faces were inches off as he tried to lean in, but she would lean back equally, making him growl as she giggled. Well, that's a really interesting question after proposing me, you know, she said playfully, and he blushed in embarrassment as she giggled. Why did you ask? Are you having any doubts? She asked, knowing that wasn't the reason and knew why he was asking it, but wanted to hear it from him. No, it isn't that. But you know, Kankuro told me that in a relationship first the couple, you know. He trailed off, blushing, and she giggled at his shyness. Have sex? She asked playfully, and he blushed and stuttered making her giggle. Well, when has we been a normal couple? You had an extreme makeout session and gave me the best first kiss a girl could ever ask for, and asked me to be your girlfriend before you took me to my first date that was equally as romantic as I could hope for, where I told you that I wanted to have a family and spend my life with you. So I guess 3 years of dating and proposing without having sex is not that unusual, and sex isn't the only thing in a relationship, love. Our bond is the strongest thing we need, she said softly, and he nodded, seeing her point as she continued. And we could, you know, have sex if you want. I has already told you I'll let you has me anytime you want. So want to do it now? She asked playfully and giggled as he turned bright red and pecked him, rubbing his whiskers softly. You are too innocent to your own good, Narkan, and way too easy to tease, she said, giggling, and he smiled as he kissed her lips softly and sensually laid kisses on her foreline and the sensitive areas of her neck, and nibbled her ear softly, earning a soft moan from her. Still think I'm too innocent? He asked huskily, and shivers ran down her spine as he pinned her to the ground with one of his knee on her thigh to raise it up, and his hands holding her wrists as he looked at her disheveled hair and kimono and the way her fishnets were giving a view of her drenched panties. He lowered his head to her ear and whispered, You're already this wet, Mari-chan, you really are a naughty lily of the desert, aren't you? He whispered, and she moaned as he kissed her ear softly and rose up, gazing at her vulnerable position lovingly, and she wriggled her wrists, knowing he won't go any further as he let her go, and she brought him in a hug and held him tightly as she cried, and he was worried. What happened, Haim? Did I hurt you? He asked, concerned, and she cried harder as he turned her around, so she laid on his chest and hugged her tightly, rubbing her back gently. Shh, what's wrong? He whispered softly as she looked at him, sobbing. I know you only hold back because of that thing I told you 1 year ago, don't you? She asked in a sob, and he smiled as his mind went to that night of the festival in the village. Flashback. Naruto and Temari were sitting on the roof of the Subaku estate as they had just returned from the annual festival in the village, and were sitting there cuddling in their traditional kimonos looking at the fireworks. "Na-kun," she whispered, and he looked at her, kissing her head softly. "Yes, Haim?" he asked, and she looked at the fireworks as she spoke. "You know, I always had a dream that I haven't told to anyone," she whispered, and he looked at her curiously. "What is that, Haim?" he asked softly as he put her head on his chest and sat her on his lap as they sat in the shower of fireworks. "I've always wanted to get married to a man that would love me as my brothers would give me away to the love of my life, and we will have that special night that I has waited for on our honeymoon," she whispered, and he smiled as he imagined her dream with him being the groom. "That's a beautiful dream, Haim," he whispered softly, and she nodded as he kissed her on her lips, cupping her face as the last of the fireworks went off, and they got lost in the moment. End of flashback. He cupped her face, kissing her tears away, and smiled at the lovely crying girl. "Look at me, love," he whispered, and she caught his loving gaze that made her heart warm, and she smiled a bit, still sobbing. "You know that I love you, right?" he asked, and she nodded as he rubbed her nose with the sleeve of his jacket, making her giggle. "Do you know why I gave you that ring tonight instead of a special date I had planned?" he asked, and she shook her head and was surprised that he had a special date planned for her, but it was just like her cute Barker to do something like that. "This ring," he said, kissing her finger and the ring as he looked at her, "is a promise," he said, and she tilted her head to the side cutely, and he smiled as he pecked her lips. "That ring contains my Freixin marker, the fastest and the most sophisticated one I has ever created. It took me a year to finish engraving such a complex seal in such a small ring. Just channel a bit of your chakra in it and I'll be there in a flash to get you. It also acts as a beacon due to the little demonic chakra I has put in the diamond, thus it has turned into a blood red color and lets me know where you are at all times so that you don't run off on me again, and it has blood seals, so no one can remove it from you other than me, or you, and force you to remove it if you are in trouble. As long as you have that ring, I'm always with you. That ring is the pinnacle that I has achieved with my sealing. My masterpiece that I created for my Haim. No one has ever come close to putting so many complex seals and synchronizing them perfectly in such a small object before. As long as that ring is with you, we are one," he said softly, and her eyes widened as she pulled out the ring and gazed at the seals engraved so finely and lightly that they weren't visible if she didn't look closely and saw what the ring meant to him. It wasn't a piece of expensive jewelry, it was a promise as to how much he loved her. He put his hand on the ring and slid it back as he cupped her cheek and brushed it softly. "Sex doesn't matter to me, Haim. I'll die a virgin if it means having you in my arms," he whispered, and she threw herself in his arms and cried, whispering, "I love you," again and again. He sat up and channeled a bit of chakra to his palm as a bit of moisture from the air came to his hand, making it wet, and he wiped her face and cleaned it away of her tear stains, and she pouted like a child, making him smile. "Let's go home, Haim, and I'll make you dinner, all right?" he asked, and she nodded as she walked a couple of steps when he suddenly swept her legs and caught her in his arms, making her squeal in glee as she wrapped her arms around his neck and snuggled in his chest. "I never said you'll be walking home," he said playfully, and she giggled. "You spoil me too much," she said playfully, and he smiled as he pecked her softly. "My princess deserves the best," he said, and she giggled. "Charmer, don't use flattery, I'm already your fiancé now," she said, and he chuckled. "Hey, fiancé does has a sexy feel to it, you know," he said, and she laughed, hitting him in the chest as he jumped up on a branch. "Wife has a much sexier feel, you know," she whispered softly, and he nodded as he kissed her forehead gently. "It does, Haim, and you'll be called that soon if I has anything to say about it," he said softly, and she smiled and nodded as he jumped through the roof with her in his arms at blinding speeds, and she squealed happily as the air hit the both of them, and they laughed happily as the people saw the blonde blurs and smiled, knowing the happiest and most mischievous as well as popular couple in the village. The whole village knew the story of an unknown ninja who came to the village, becoming the right hand of the KZ Kid and stealing the heart of the princess of the village and melting the ice princess's heart to only him. He walked into the Subaku compounds and put her down as they walked in happily to the house and to the dining room to see Kankuro and Gaara, sitting there, and Gaara gazed at her curiously as he saw she didn't even spare him a glance as Naruto sat on the table and Sato on his lap as both giggled and whispered, making small talk to each other out of their earshot, and he coughed a bit, getting their attention. "Temari, for what it's worth, I don't want this any more than you do, and I'm sorry, but we has to think of the village," he said, and was cut off as she spoke up. "It's all right, Gaara, understand," she chirped happily, and he rose an eyebrow as both he and Kankuro glanced at each other, knowing something was up if she forgave him so easily even if Naruto had talked to her. "Are we missing something, guys?" asked Kankuro, and Temari smiled as she glanced at Naruto, who nodded, kissing her cheek, and she put her hand on his cheek as both of their cheeks touched and they looked at them happily. Temari raised up her hand and showed them the finger with the ring as their eyes widened, and jaws dropped to the ground, and she giggled at seeing their reactions. "Guys, I'm engaged to my blonde teddy here," she said, softly pecking his cheek, and he smiled as he put his head on her shoulder and held her tightly. A moment later, Gaara broke out of his stupor and smiled brightly, nodding. "I'm happy and approve this engagement wholeheartedly, and I'm sure the village will love to see their favorite couple get together," he said, and she smiled and nodded as she turned to Kankuro, who was rooted and absolutely still, and Gaara shook him as he looked at him like a robot. "Ho," he replied intelligently as his brain fried from the overload of the news, and he fainted, and Temari and Naruto laughed wholeheartedly, and Gaara shook his head, face palming. "Great, you broke him," he said, and they laughed harder as Gaara turned to Naruto and motioned for him to stand up, and they stood in front of each other, as his face turned serious and he gazed into his eyes. "Naruto, as you may key, I trust you to keep my sister happy, or friend or not, I will crush you with my sand," he said as Temari blushed in embarrassment, and Naruto chuckled. "Don't worry, Gaara, you know how much I love her," he said, and Gaara nodded and smiled at his honest answer and raised his hand, and Naruto shook it, showing the faith Gaara put in him. He walked into the kitchen as he started to prepare the dinner when suddenly Temari wrapped her arms from behind him and hugged him tightly, making him smile. He brought her hand up and kissed it softly as he asked, "You want something special for tonight's dinner, Mari-chan?" he asked, and she nodded with her face in his back, and he smiled. "It wouldn't happen to be one of the cinnamon apple pie or the chocolate truffle cake that I've just put in the oven now, would it?" he asked playfully, and she turned him around and glared at him. "Are you trying to make me fat, mister?" she asked in mock anger, and he smiled as he pushed her against the counter and sat her on it as he held her when she wrapped her legs around him, and he smiled as he rubbed her stomach. "Now a fat and chubby Mari-chan will look so cute, of course, I'm trying to make you fat. After all, then I can has more of my time to kiss, you know," he said playfully, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and put her forehead against his, giggling. "Flatterer, I know you always know how to get away with me. You are the only one who could say he wants me fat and live without being slashed by Kamatari," she said, and he chuckled as he rubbed her stomach softly, and she blushed a bit, feeling warm and wanted him to go a bit down in her spread legs. He leaned to her ear as he whispered, "Not yet, Haim," he said huskily, and she blushed a scarlet at his amused smile, thinking how he read her mind when he ran his hand up her thigh, massaging it, and slowly got on the inside of it and near her panties as her breath hitched and she moaned, when suddenly he stopped and pulled back and pecked her, moving back to the oven, leaving her blushing and wet, chuckling as she grinded her teeth at his teasing and pranking, but melted when he showed her the two pans in his hands with the desserts, and her mouth watered as she moved forward with a spoon and plate, and he held it back, making her glare. "Payment for the chef first, Haim," he said, and she pouted as she pressed her lips to his fully and sucked his bottom lip softly, and took the pan from his hand and cut herself a big slice with the knife, and smiled as Naruto wrapped his arms from behind her and put his chin on her shoulder. "Won't my Haim share it with her fiancé?" he asked in mock hurt, and she giggled. "All right, but get the rest of the dinner and we'll share it, but Kankuro gets no dessert," she said, and he chuckled as Kankuro yelled about being unfair from the dining room. They ate and laughed as they talked, and Kankuro and Gaara smiled at the way their faces were glowing with happiness and how their family was growing. After a great fight between Kankuro and Temari on desert before she bashed his head with her fan and ate it with Naruto, while Naruto secretly passed a share to Gaara, who took it gratefully, we find our couple in their room with Naruto in his shirt and boxers and Temari over him, kissing him passionately in just a pink t-shirt and white panties as he had one hand on her waist and one buried in her hair. She took out her tongue from his mouth as both panted and had their lips swollen from the long makeout session as she lied completely pressed on Naruto. She breathed heavily listening to his heartbeat as she felt his hard member near her thighs and grabbed it as Naruto grunted in pleasure when she rubbed her hand over it and Naruto caught her wrist as she looked at him biting her lip knowing how much he was holding himself back. "Why are you holding so much back, Naru-kun? I can take care of it and we won't go all the way, you know," she said desperately and he smiled and shook his head as he brought her hand up and pecked her softly. "Because I'm not sure if I would be able to stop if we get going. You are too beautiful and our little fun session make me hard to control as it is," he said and she blushed. "Then don't stop," she started as he pressed his lips on hers and smiled. "Haim, stop it, I told you that it's not about sex and I know that isn't the matter, so what are you afraid of?" he asked softly, rubbing her cheek as she bit her lip and averted her gaze as he pulled her face back to him and caught her gaze, piercing her to the soul with his stern gaze. "I am scared," she whispered and he was confused as she continued. "What if some other girl in the village comes onto you and why you then I," she said as she broke down, and he hugged her close and rubbed her back softly. "Haim, has I ever even looked at any girl that way except you?" he asked softly and she shook her head sobbing. "And I never will," he said as she looked up listening to his confident voice and the power those eyes held. "Even if you don't want to be with me, there is no other," he said as she pressed her lips on his, cutting him off and cried in the kiss, but didn't let go. He hugged her and rubbed her back softly. "I will never leave you. You're the only one for me," she said with a sniff and he smiled. "And you're the only for me, Haim," he whispered, making her smile. "Now sleep, tomorrow you have to leave early and travel to the Leaf, so rest now," he said softly, kissing the top of her head as she fell asleep in his arms, lulling to his heartbeat, and cuddled up to him as he held her close and slept with one thought in his mind. "You really don't understand how much you mean to me, Haim. I love you with my life," he thought as sleep claimed him and he spent the last night together with her before she left. Next morning, Naruto opened his eyes as the light hit his eyes and saw his princess lying on his chest, and her silky hair flowing wildly, and smiled as he shook her a bit and she moaned. "Naru-kun, deeper," she moaned and he blushed at her words and shook her more before he heard some more moans and lost his control, making her dream a reality. She woke up and looked up at his eyes, and blushed as she realized it was only a dream and was surprised as Naruto chuckled. "Was I any good, Haim?" he asked and she blushed, a scarlet turning into a tomato, and he laughed as she hit him with her pillow saying perfect. He stopped her and pulled her in for a chaste kiss as she moaned and looked at him lovingly. "Morning, Mari-chan," he whispered and she smiled and nodded. "Morning, Naru-kun," she whispered and he kissed her head as she sighed happily. He sat up as she cuddled in his lap and he hugged her close to him. "So today's the day you go to the Leaf," he said and she nodded, not liking the fact one bit. "Want to take a bath together?" he asked and she smiled as she looked up, pressing her lips to his and nodded with a blush on her face. He filled up the bathtub and stepped in the water, wearing his swimming trunks as she entered the bathroom and dropped the towel she was wearing to reveal a white bikini and blushed a pretty pink as she stepped in the water and sat with her back to his chest as he wrapped his arms around her naked stomach and she melted in his arms and the warm water taking off her tiredness. He kissed her neck softly, licking and grazing his teeth on her skin, and she moaned softly as she grabbed his neck from behind and tilted her head, letting him do what he wanted. He stopped as he brought the hand shower over them and she turned around, tracing her hands on his ripped muscles, and he traced his hands on her hourglass figure as both made out heavily and walked out with smiles and blushes on their faces. She still couldn't believe how he could just resist taking her to bed every time they made out, and stopped just as he started to give in to the lust, just because he wanted her to let her has her dream. She gazed back as she saw him wearing his pants and was looking for his shirt when she hugged him from behind, surprising him, and he turned around as she buried her head in his naked chest and traced her soft hands over his toned and non-buffy chest, and he held her, not understanding what had gotten into her. "I love you," she whispered, and he smiled, brushing her slightly wet hair with his fingers and kissed her top of the head. "I love you too, Haim," he whispered, and she smiled as she pecked him and got off to dry her hair and get ready with the equipment as he did the same. So why aren't you coming with us? I mean, Gaara trusts you the most and I thought you would be his choice even if we were going to Konoha. He could have gotten you an Unbu mask. She asked as she brushed her hair and was tying it. Oh, Gaara didn't want to leave the village weak and unguarded with him gone, so he handed over the military power of the village to me after the council agreed on it. He said simply, and she turned around stunned and narrowed her eyes at his back as he was checking his equipment, not noticing her ire. And why didn't you tell me this earlier? She asked neutrally, though was getting angry that he hid such a big fact from her. Oh, Gaara told me after you left the office yesterday and I was so worried about you that it slipped my mind. Then we had our moments and I forgot. He said, chuckling sheepishly, and she smiled, shaking her head at the idiot blonde. That Barker forgot that he was almost a cave because he was worried about me. He really is an idiot. But he is my idiot. She thought fondly, smiling as Naruto came behind her and helped her tie her sash on her waist and kissed her neck softly. So what are you smiling about, Haim? He asked, and she smiled, turning around in his arms and looked at him lovingly. Oh, nothing, just a Barker that I love so much, she said playfully, and he chuckled. Then I wouldn't know him now, would I? He asked equally playfully, making her giggle. No, you wouldn't, she said as she pressed her lips on his as he tasted her vanilla-flavored lip gloss, the only makeup she wore, and smiled as he nibbled her ear, making her moan. You taste absolutely delicious, he whispered, making her blush as she punched his chest and muttered Barker, completely embarrassed, making him chuckle as they got down to see Gaara waiting downstairs with Kankuro all ready to leave. Let's go, he said, and they nodded as they walked out, moving slowly to the gates, walking as Temari was wrapped up around his arm as he had his arm wrapped around her waist, and her head on his shoulder, drawing many stares from the villagers as they went on, without a care in the world. They reached the gates as the couple raised an eyebrow to see the council, the Unbu commander and the Thounin commander. They're waiting for them, but figured that they were there to see Gaara off and smiled at them, who nodded back. Temari let him go as she stood beside her brothers and gazed at Naruto, sadly not wanting to leave. Naruto saw her expression and walked up as a crowd of shinobi of all ranks built up to see the important figures of the village standing there. Naruto saw her expression and walked up to her, confusing everyone greatly as he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her passionately, causing all of them to blush and look away as he broke off to see a blushing Temari, but she was smiling, not embarrassed at the public affection, and her eyes locked on her lover. He raised her left hand and kissed the finger with the ring and gazed at her, giving her a signal to the ring as he whispered softly in her ear. Remember, if you ever need me, I'll be there in a flash, the village be damned, he whispered, and she blushed, kissing his cheek, and nodded with a smile. Gaara coughed, drawing his attention as Kiyo and Ebizo walked up to him, and he nodded his head in respect, and they smiled fondly at the boy they loved so much. Honorable elders, if you would do the honors, said Gaara respectfully, and Naruto was confused as he gazed at them, and his and everyone's eyes widened as they took out a cage hat with the candy for wind on it, and Temari put her hands on her mouth in shock as every shinobi's eyes widened in shock. Naruto, as you make Gaara no Sabakyu has named you his temporary replacement until the time he, the Godame Kazekid, returns. Do you accept to protect this village in his stead with your life? She said seriously, and he was stunned as he answered unconsciously. Ha. He stuttered, and she smiled as she put the hat over his head and his jacket flowed in the wind as all the shinobi kneeled down, and Ebizo spoke up. Then we name you the Kazekid of Sunagaku no Sato until Godame Dono returns. All say the Lord Kazekid, he said, and they all shouted in unison. Kazekid-sama, said all the shinobi, and his eyes watered as he saw Temari trying to kneel down and caught her shoulders as she looked at him confused. No, you are my partner in everything, never bow to me, even if I'm the Kazekid for now, Haim. Neither should any one of you, please stand, respect is earned, not forced. Kneel when I do something truly honorable for this village, he said softly, and her eyes watered as she nodded, and all shinobi smiled as their respect for their temporary cave increased tenfold. She kissed him and whispered in his ear. Looks like your old dream came true, Naruto, but the candy is wind instead of fire, she whispered, and he nodded as she stepped back with her brothers and looked at her love standing in front of the shinobi forces like a commander, and couldn't be happier as she saw his hat shadow, his upper half of the face, and the way his jacket flowed, and the confidence with which he stood, while the shinobi looked at him in admiration, making her smile. He really was a born leader. Gaara and Kankuro too had similar thoughts as Gaara spoke up. "Take care of the village in my stead, Kazekid Dono," he said, and Naruto smiled and nodded. "Don't worry, no harm will come to it as long as I breathe, I give you my word, Gaara Dono," he said, and Gaara nodded with a smile. "The wind hat looks better on you than the fire one, Blondie," Kankuro said, making them all chuckle while Temari bashed his head in. "He's the Kazekid, you idiot, show him some respect," she hissed as they all laughed harder as Kankuro cried, and she reprimanded him and Naruto gave her a kiss, hiding her face beneath his hat, making them all narrow their eyes trying to peep in. "Take care of yourself, Haim, and call me if you need anything," he said, and she nodded, pressing her lips on his one last time as they left and waved back at the new Kazekid and got lost in winds of the desert out of their view. Chapter 8. Time skip 3 days later. Konohagakure no Sato. The three-man squad from Suna came up to the gates of the village after 3 days of traveling and walked to the village hidden in the leaves. They saw Tsunade there standing with a team of Unbu behind her waiting for them. They stopped in front of them as Tsunade smiled at the three who gazed at her neutrally. "Welcome, Kazekid Dono, it has been a while. I hope the trip was peaceful," she asked, and he nodded. "It was fine, Hokid Dono, and indeed it has been a long time," he said, and she nodded as they walked towards the Hokid Tower and watched the villagers go about as it was still early in the morning. "Well, would you like to rest at the Leaf Dragon for today and start the talks tomorrow, Kazekid Dono?" asked Tsunade politely, and he shook his head. "No, we are well rested from the previous night and the whole day is free. Plus, I want to get back to the village as soon as I could," he said, and Tsunade was confused as to the hurry and saw Temari too wanted to return if what her face told her was anything to go by. "Plus I know that idiot will do something reckless in my place. He is a trouble magnet after all, and the more time he has the more paperwork I'll get for fixing his troubles," he thought and sighed but smiled, thinking of his brother in all but blood. "So Temari, you must want to meet your friends after all this time. I remember you making a lot of them when you acted as a liaison for the first year," she said with a smile, and Temari showed no signs of happiness. "No, not really," she said, and now Tsunade was getting a bit confused at the tense environment building up and decided to make the rest of the trip in silence. Hokage Tower. Hokage Office. They walked into the Hokage office as Gaara and Temari took a seat in front of Tsunade, and Kankuro stood at their backs on the ready for any attacks. Tsunade saw it and smiled at his professionalism, even amongst allies. Suddenly the door to the office opened and in walked the people she wanted the last to be seen and cursed them to hell, but offered them a seat beside her as the esteemed elders of the council sat beside her. Kaha gave them a grandmotherly smile as they remained neutral. "Welcome, Kazekid Dono. I was thinking that we might discuss some of the finer points of our alliance before we go to the council chambers, so we can save some precious time," she said, and Gaara nodded, not seeing any harm, and knew the huge council of the Leaf wasted a lot of time in discussions. "Kazekid Dono, first, I must say the Leaf really appraises your newfound quality of sealing equipment and the new and strong way that you hold the village so strongly in front of the world under your reign. For a newly appointed Kazekid and one such young as you, it truly is impressive," said Homura, and Temari and Gaara saw where this was going and he decided to entertain them a bit. "Yes, well, I found a newfound prodigy that Temari one day brought in, and he joined our village since he had training in the shinobi arts but wasn't allied to any village, so I let him join. He already possessed the skills of a Chunin and quickly went up the ranks, gaining a lot of respect and influence in the village. He is my most trusted shinobi, and I can safely say in a battle he would best even me, and is a dear friend of mine and very close to my family. He is a true prodigy in the art of sealing and has provided us with various new seals and modified our existing ones to beyond the skills of perfection. As of this moment as I speak, I has named him my temporary replacement until I return to the village with the complete backing of the Suna Council," he said, and all of their eyes widened at finding such a diamond being found roaming around, and then becoming such a strong shinobi to the point of him trusting the boy so much that he made him the temporary cave in his stead. The boy must has undying loyalty as well as a true prodigy, they mused. "Who is this shinobi you speak so highly of, Kazekid Dono? He must be something special to do so much for the village in such little time," asked Danzo a bit too curiously, making his eyes narrow at the crippled coop. "Oh, he's something all right. thought Temeri with a blush as she traced the ring on her finger happily. Sinead caught her blush and her eyebrows rose in surprise. Well, well, looks like the desert princess has a crush on this mysterious shinobi. That certainly would make the talks interesting, she thought with a smirk and turned to Gaara as they waited for his answer. I don't see this as being important to the talks of the alliance. I guess we are getting off track, he said stoically, making the elders scowl, while Sinead smirked at his skillful dodging of the questions, knowing how much this boy intrigued those coots and how Gaara was taking her revenge on them. As Kaha was about to get some more information on him, but Sinead cut her off. You're right, Kazekid Dono, let's get on with the talks, she said with a smile, making them all smile and the elders too scowl. Kazekid Dono, our villages has been old comrades in arms and the invasion was just a ploy on our common enemy's plot, so we hold no grudges. Started Homura, and Gaara nodded gratefully that his father's mistakes were forgotten and they were willing to move on. So we has found a really nice and old custom used to holding strong and stable alliances that has been with us the generations now, he finished, and Gaara looked at him, curiously motioning for them to go on. A political marriage, Danzo said as Gaara thought about it for a moment, and Temeri too knew that it had been done in the past several times to strengthen ties. Her father too had told her that one day she might have to go through with it, but luckily she found her blonde-haired idiot, she thought fondly. Yes, I can see the point in that, though there must be people of great importance from both sides and I don't think that a girl from the Leaf will be willing to settle down with me, so I guess that I wasn't your choice, he asked, and they all nodded at his assessment and he nodded back. Well then, who did you has in mind, he asked, and the elders all nodded to Sinead, who sighed as she flayed her chakra, and an Unbu appeared with Sasuke coming behind him, and stood behind them smiling smugly. Gaara raised an eyebrow to Sinead, who just gave him an apologetic glance, and he was confused as to why he was called in the middle of such an important talk. I'm sorry, but I thought we were having important political talks, so why has you allowed him here, he asked, pointing to the Uchiha who had that arrogant smirk on his face. Well, Kazekid Dono, as I'm sure you already know, this is Sasuke Uchiha, the most promising upcoming Vounin we has and the last Uchiha of our village, said Kaha with pride, and he raised an eyebrow at Sinead. He is your most promising upcoming Vounin Hokid Dono, he asked apprehensively, and Sasuke's smirk died down a bit. Why, is there something wrong with that, he asked rudely, and Gaara gave him a stern glare, making him shiver from the bloodlust in his eyes as he turned to Sinead and gave her a stern look. I would suggest you teach your most promising upcoming Vounin the manners to talk to the Kazekid of the Sand and remind him he may be the last Uchiha, but I am the Kazekid and he must remember the ranks carefully, he said, and she nodded apologetically and turned to the arrogant Uchiha with a glare. Sasuke Uchiha, mind your place and do not forget who you are talking to. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. Am I clear, she asked coldly, and he nodded with a grunt, and she turned back to Gaara. I apologize for his behavior, I assure you he didn't mean anything by it, she said politely, and Gaara nodded with a small smile. Looks like the standard of your village's elites have fallen, Hokid Dono, to think he is your most promising Vounin, he said, and she said nothing, knowing Sasuke wasn't the strongest, and if her blonde Gaki was here, he would have kicked his ass to a while back, though let the thought slide, as she didn't want to show her sadness of losing him to them. Why does your village has anyone better than me, an Uchiha and born elite at my age, he asked smugly, and Sinead glared at him, but Gaara answered before she could say anything. Actually yes, Uchiha-san, we do. Our most promising Vounin is stronger than I am and is so respected and looked up to in our village, that he is currently acting as the Kazekid in the village in my stead until I return, he said, and Sasuke ground his teeth at the humiliation he felt at being outdone, while Temeri and Kankuro smiled proudly. Really, this young shinobi is so young, Kazekid Dono, asked Danzo, trying to get some more information, and just got a nod of confirmation, making him scowl that he wasn't giving away anything else. So coming back to the talks, Kazekid Dono, we propose a marriage with Sasuke as the groom from our village, seeing his talent and bloodline, as well as the respect and influence he holds from our village. Plus, he is the personal apprentice to our elite Vounin Kakashi Hatake, the copy ninja, said Kaha, and he raised an eyebrow at her. So I suppose we are supposed to send a bride, I guess, since he wants to rebuild his clan, if I know him right, unless He let the thought hanging as Tsunade and Temari giggled while Kankuro coughed from behind, though it sounded more like laughter. Sasuke clenched his fists and fumed and seethed on the inside at the insults he was getting. "I'm not gay," he said in a low growl, and Gaara nodded. "Yes, of course, so I guess you already has had a bride from our side in mind, unless you want me to go through some files," he asked, and they smiled, shaking their heads, and Sasuke glanced at Temari, who didn't spare him a glance, making him scowl. "No, there I no need to that, Kazekid Dono, we has already thought of it, and Sasuke too has agreed to the choice and likes her very much," said Kaha, and he nodded, motioning for her to go on. "We has decided for a marriage with a complete alliance between Sasuke Uchiha of the Leaf and Temari no Sabakyu of the Sand," she said as their eyes widened, and Gaara was shocked at their choice while Temari clutched her fists in anger and barely controlled slapping the Uchiha to take his dirty glance of her that he was giving her, making her growl. "She is directly related to you as well as the Yondem Kazekid and is one of your top kunoichi. Both has high standings in our villages and will help solidify a great alliance." She was cut off as Gaara raised his hand. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, so I suggest you think of something else," he said stoically as Temari didn't say anything from the anger she felt at their disgusting proposal for an alliance. "What, but how could you refuse such a great proposal, Kazekid Dono? We has offered the hand of such a great shinobi, and the last of our noble clans. And he too wants a strong kunoichi like her in marriage, then what's the problem?" cried Homura in disbelief at the direct rejection, and Temari spoke up in a low voice. "It's because I'm already engaged," she said, and their eyes widened as she showed them the ring and turned to Gaara, who nodded. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at the peculiar design of the ring, though said nothing as she recognized the design. "Surely it could be reconsidered. I mean, it's only an engagement, and for the good of the village's relations, it could be broken off. I mean, Sasuke is an eligible candidate too, you know," said Kaha, and she ground her teeth at their proposal, and Tsunade too was growing irritated at their hunger for power now. Gaara was awaiting Volcano about to erupt as he spoke calmly, bottling up his emotions and the bloodlust he felt at the Uchiha, eyeing his sister hungrily. "Give me a day to consider it and let us talk about it. We shall continue this tomorrow. I am tired now and will take the council meeting tomorrow," he said, trying to end the meeting before he blew up and went shikaki on the village, and they nodded with smiles plastered on their faces. There was no way he could refuse the precious Uchiha in marriage, they thought. "Yes, of course, take all the time you need, Kazekid Dono, we shall continue this tomorrow," said Tsunade, and he nodded as he and Temari got up and walked out of the office. They walked through the village in silence and reached the hotel. As soon as the door to the room behind them closed, Temari swung her fan at Gaara as his automatic sand defense stopped her attack, and he turned around seeing her furious face. "You think I'll break of my engagement with my Narukan to marry that bastard Uchiha? I'll beat you and that arrogant bastard too, Suna, and I can't even imagine what Narukan would do after he hears you are considering that disgusting plan," she hissed in anger, and he clutched the fan with his sand and pulled it off her grip, making her growl as he spoke up. "I'm not considering anything. You will not be married to anyone but Uzumaki as long as I breathe." He spoke stoically, and her anger died down as she looked at him surprised. "Then why did you tell them you would consider it and not outright refuse them?" she asked in confusion, and he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He had no idea how Naruto kept her so controlled while she was so impulsive without him, and that was what made the proposal all the more stupid to him. Outright rejecting such a great proposal without even considering it sends a wrong message to them, he said, and she was about to retort as he cut her off. "And if I had stayed 5 more minutes with that bastard eyeing you like that, there would have been only one Uchiha left alive in the elemental nations. And trust me, he isn't loyal to the Leaf right now," he said, and she saw the bloodlust and killing intent at the way he said the last thought, and smiled as her anger died down, and she hugged her baby brother and he hugged her bad, awkwardly, still a bit uncomfortable with intimate contact. "Thank you, Gaara, you are a good little brother," she said happily, and he nodded with a smile as they sat on the bed, and Kankuro spoke up. "They are pretty interested in our blonde Guki," he said, and Temari giggled as Gaara nodded with a smile. "So what do you think he must be doing right now?" he asked, and Temari smiled sadly as she missed his hugs and kisses already and wanted to hold him to her, though Gaara smiled. I bet he must be having fun taking care of all the paperwork for me and cursing me for giving him the hat for a few days. He said as in Suna a certain sleeping blonde sneezed, as he saw his shadow clones doing piles of paperwork that would have taken Gara a week to do. "Oh, I guess Haim must be missing me," he thought, and went back to sleep. Gara suddenly got the impulse to kill Azumaki, though he didn't get why, and pushed the thought away. "I bet he must be missing having his princess to kiss and lick," said Kankuro teasingly, and Temari blushed as she bonked his head, making him yelp, saying pervert. Though she did want to has a makeout session with him and traced her ring finger fondly. Meanwhile, in a cave in River Country, 9 figures stood atop the fingers of the statue of Jidoma Zoas. 2 of them were real while 7 of them were mere projections. "Sasori, what news has you got on the sand?" asked a man with purple eyes and concentric rings in his eyes to a man with a hunched back and a mechanical tail. "The sand has upgraded its defense really heavily, and it has been pretty difficult to get in touch with my informant on the inside," he said, and the man with the strange eyes narrowed his eyes at him as he continued. "Though he did manage to create a hole in the barrier a few days ago for a short while before it was repaired, and I was able to get a little important information out of it," he said, and all of them nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I was told that the Ichibi Jinchurikai is gone to the Leaf for a few days for talks with the Hokage on the alliance between them, leaving the Kyubi Jinchurikai alone in the village," he said, and the leader nodded. "That is great news and will help in the capture of the Kyubi Jinchurikai now," he said, and Kisum voiced his question. "Hey, wouldn't it be easier to capture the One-Tails now that he is alone?" asked Kisum impatiently, as Itaki sighed at his impulsive partner. Kisum, with him being outside the village, he can battle without any restrictions and will be difficult to capture alive if he releases his bither. The Kyubi Jinchurikai is alone in the village, without the KZ Kid to back him up, and we can provide plenty of distractions with the civilians, allowing for an easy capture, and then the Ichibi will be left alone, making it easier to catch him in the future," he said, and the shark man nodded. "Yeah, when you put it like that it makes sense, Itaki-san," he said sheepishly, and the leader sighed. "That was very astute of you, Itaki, and you are correct in your assessment of the situation. Plus, extracting the Kyubi will take a lot of time, making him capture with the Ichibi and holding down the Ichibi for the time being difficult, so we will take this chance," he said, and they all nodded, as he turned to Sasori. "Sasori, do you have an estimation of his skills?" he asked, and Sasori nodded. "I wasn't able to get much since I had little time and most of his files were kept classified, but he is a Downin in the village. He had wind and water as his primary dual affinities that he showed mastery over to pass the Thounin exams, and has good Teivutsu skills. His Genbutsu skills weren't mentioned, but it is safe to say he could only dispel them, being a Jinchurikai with high reserves," he said, and the leader nodded as Itaki spoke up. "Then it would be good if Deidara and Sasori went to capture him," he said, and the leader looked at him curiously, knowing his calculative instincts were always spot on. "Why is that, Itaki? Why not you and Kisum?" he asked, and Itaki looked at him stoically. "Kisum uses water jutsu, making it difficult for him to fight in the desert, and he has good Teivutsu skills, so it is safe to say he can hold out against his same harder without using ninjutsu, as he knows its specialty. I am a primary Genbutsu user, with good skills in other fields, but am not a powerhouse that can provide enough distractions. Deidara with his explosion release can create nice distractions and can counter his wind affinity with his blasts, and his water jutsu too would be weak in the desert, so that isn't a problem with so less water sources to use. Both are long-range fighters, making his Teivutsu skills useless and are the closest to the village at this moment of time. Plus, Sasori can keep a level head and attack as Deidara brings the distraction, as we all know his elegant skills," he finished, and everyone looked at him amazed at his perfect deductions. "Excellently put, Itaki, your deductions are spot on. Deidara, Sasori traveled to the sand and retrieved the Kyubi Jinchurikai. We shall start with the weakest village and the strongest of the bither," he said, and Sasori nodded. "It shall be done," said Sasori calmly. "Yeah, we'll bring him here alive, said Deidara, enthusiastically, making the leader sigh at the idiot. "Don't get overconfident, he is a Jinchurikai of the 9 tails after all," said the leader as Kisum laughed. "Oh come on, he wore an orange jumpsuit and only new shadow clones when I last saw him," How tough could he has gotten in 3 years? I bet even Deodara alone can take him down with his stupid clay toys. He said as Deodara fumed. Hey, don't disrespect my art home. After all, art is an explosion. He shouted, making a small blast in the cave, making the leader sigh at their antics. Art is eternal, not something that disappears in but a moment like my art, said Sasori as Deodara was about to respond when the leader butt in. Alright, that's enough, don't waste any more time, go and retrieve the Kyubi Vinchurikai and we'll prepare for the extraction in the meantime. He said, and they all nodded as 7 figures vanished and Sasori and Deodara walked towards the sand village, leaving the cave behind them. Next morning. Konohagakure no Sato. Leaf Dragon Hotel. Temari woke up with a yawn as she rubbed her eyes and clutched the pillow to her tightly, missing her blonde head pillow she left in Suna and wanted to go back and glump him for all he was worth. She woke up and freshened up, deciding to go for a walk in the village until she had to go to the negotiation talks at noon. She saw Kankuro and Gaara, just waking up, and was glad that her brother could now sleep since the last month. Naruto had put a demonic influence suppression seal over his weak 3 symbol seal and had effectively cut off all communications with the Bifu until he talked to it himself. She remembered the first night Kankuro had seen him asleep, and had fainted from the terror he felt and how she had laughed so hard as she had forgotten to tell him about the sealing. Morning, Gaara, Kankuro, she said, and they smiled and nodded with a yawn. Morning, Temari, where are you going so early in the morning? Asked Gaara, and she smiled. Well, I couldn't sleep well, so I decided to has a training session and has some breakfast outside before we went to the council. It would also help me vent out my frustrations a bit, she said, and Gaara nodded, seeing her point, and was glad that his sister was such a determined kunoichi, unlike those idiot fangirls the Leaf had and called them shinobi. Be careful and flare your chakra if you has any troubles and I'll come to help, alright? But I'm sure there will be Unbu there watching you, so it should be fine, he said, and she smiled and shook her head, confusing him. You aren't fast enough, then who I always has to help? He will come to me in a flash if I need him, she said softly and clutched her ring finger near her heart as Gaara and Kankuro narrowed their eyes at the ring after hearing the word flash and saw the fine lines of seals that anyone would miss if not knowing what they were, and their eyes widened as they understood what she meant, and Gaara smirked. He is still in Suna and is still closer to you than anyone else. That idiot never ceases to amaze me, Gaara said, shaking his head, and Kankuro chuckled as Temari smiled, fondly tracing her ring, imagining her Naokun wrapping her up in his arms. Hey, it's a surprise she hasn't called him already to be her pillow, he said. Temari blushed and her eye twitched. Hey, I am not that desperate, or missing him that much, she said indignantly as Gaara spoke up. That's why you are up so early and ready to go when in Suna you always get up late wanting to cuddle up to him instead of early morning training, he said monotonously, making her blush a scarlet red as she stuttered out a no and ran out in embarrassment, slamming the door behind her, as Gaara had an amused smile on his face while Kankuro chuckled wholeheartedly. Now that's a fine way to start a morning, he said, chuckling, and Gaara nodded with a smile. He still had some problems sleeping as the silence in his head was strange, but his bloodlust was now less than ever thanks to a rested mind and had better than ever control over his sand. Temari walked through the village with a pretty pink blush on her face as she remembered the conversation from the morning and missed her blonde idiot more than ever. She walked through the village thinking of a place to eat, when she remembered the place her love always used to talk to her about. The only place that let him eat peacefully even if he didn't have the money. She walked up to the ramen stand and entered Ichiraku's as she saw they had just opened up. Is it open? She asked, and they looked at her, surprised that someone came for ramen so early in the morning. Chuki smiled at the girl and nodded. Yes, we are always open in the morning. It's an old habit that I have to my #1 customer. Even if he isn't here, I still wait for him and keep the stock ready. You never know when he may come in, he said, smiling, and Temari smiled at the 2 smiling faces and knew of only one idiot who could has ramen for breakfast. You really cared for Naruto, she asked, smiling, and Ayame looked at her surprised. You knew him? She asked, and Temari nodded and she smiled. Well, ever since he left the business is increasing, but it isn't really the same without him, you know. I miss my little brother. He always used to come in the morning with his goofy grin and had 10 bowls of ramen. I swear he is the only one who could have so many in the morning, she said with a giggle, and Temari smiled at the fondly smiling family. You still wait for him? She asked softly, and Chuki smiled as he boiled the noodles. Those idiots in the village can believe all that they want that he is dead, but I can swear on my life, he won't die before he comes to me and has his last order of 50 bowls of Naruto-sized ramen. He said, making her giggle, that he had his own dish named there and ordered one Naruto-sized bowl. She ate slowly, listening to them talk so fondly about her fiancé, and could see the genuine care they held for him. As she finished, she put a huge tip, making Ayame's eyes widen as she saw the money and tried to protest, but she gave it with a smile. It's a thank you for all the years you helped Naruto, when he didn't have the money, she said, and Ayame took it hesitantly, hearing this as a tear rolled down her eye, remembering her little blonde goofball. As Temari turned to leave, she left one message for the family. You know, Suna has one really fond customer, who doesn't have his taste of ramen in the village, and his legendary tongue starves for it and talks about this place a lot. I bet he will love to see this stand in Suna, and we are looking for good places for tourist civilians, she said, offering them a place in Suna, and they were about to refuse, when she said something that made their hearts stop. He can eat ramen day and night, and all he talks about is how he used to eat at Ichiraki's for free, when he didn't have the money as a small child. Please consider my offer. I'll take care of everything to get you settled in the village, and he would love the surprise, she said cryptically, keeping a small scroll with her details to contact her in the village if they accepted, and left as Ayame put her hands over her mouth and Chuki's eyes widened in disbelief. There was only one child that they helped all through his childhood like that. To-san his. She whispered as tears streamed down her eyes, and he hugged her. Yes, Ayame, I knew he was alright. Those idiots don't has what it takes to take my boy down. I has made him strong with my legendary ramen skills, he said proudly with tears, and Ayame giggled at his stupid answer. Looks like I will has to consider moving to Suna. That mysterious customer would make up for my sales by himself, he said smiling, and Ayame nodded. She too despised the way his banishment was celebrated, and if he really was in Suna, then it might be a nice change of scenery. I always liked a little extreme climate, she said, making Chuki laugh, as they cleaned the stand, smiling brightly at the good news she left with. Temari walked to the training grounds with a smile, knowing it would be a great surprise for him if she took him on a date to Ichiraki's in Suna. She reached the training ground and swung her fan around, getting a feel for it as she moved to the middle of the clearing and started going through her Tessenbutsu katas, and looked like she was dancing in a deadly dance as sides of cutting wind flew here and there, staging the training field. Naruto had helped her incorporate some free-flowing moves which could be used in close combat to take away her handicap and increase her skill with the fan. She felt a foreign presence hiding in the trees as she suddenly flicked her fan open to 3 moons and swung it in a wide horizontal arc towards the place she felt the presence from. Wind style, wind scythe jutsu, she shouted as many trees were cut through, and Sasuke jumped up and into the clearing with an amused smile on his face as she flicked her fan behind her, ready to go on the offensive, and smirked. Is this how the Uchiha has fallen, stalking me while I am training? She taunted, and he frowned at her taunt and crossed his arms over his chest, but then smirked. Yes, you are a true kunoichi, someone I could trust as my wife, unlike those fangirls and weak kunoichi that follow me around. Let's has lunch together and we could get to know each other better, he said in pride, and she scoffed at his pathetic flirting. He couldn't even match her Narkan in words, she mused. He would just say something that would make her heart warm and would make her want to kiss him immediately. All she felt now was disgust. She wanted to puke at the fact that at one point, when she first saw him, she thought he was good looking. But that too wasn't the case with how she had seen her fiancé and his perfect athletic build with lean and agile muscles. She blushed as she thought of his ripped body and the package that he was hiding underneath it all for her when they finally got together. Sasuke smirked, seeing her blush, thinking he was the reason for it. So I will make reservations for today at the best restaurant on Leaf. I take it as a yes, seeing your blush, he said slyly, and she scrunched up her face in disgust as he broke her out of her thoughts. In your dreams, Uchiha, I was thinking of my fiancé and how you could never match up to him. Me. Blush thinking of you. What a riot. She giggled, making him furious. Hey, don't mock me, I'm an Uchiha, an elite. I'm way better than that nameless fiancé of yours. He said arrogantly, and she laughed harder, making him fume. Well, Mr. Elite, the difference between you and him is so great that you couldn't even imagine it, she said as he was about to retort as she cut him off. I'll give an example, Mr. Elite, she said, and he fumed at her elite mock, but let her speak. I sensed you from 500 meters away when you were trying to hide your presence, she said, and he looked at her confused as to the point she was trying to make. Wasn't it great that he could get so close to her without her sensing as she continued? My love would get behind me and wrap his arms around me and kiss my neck to make me sense him, and he could follow me behind all day long without me noticing or sensing him, if he wants, not that he could resist holding me. She whispered the last part, but he heard it loud and clear, and ground his teeth as she made each point, and he listened as every time she cut off his retort. And Mr. Elite, as you are here stalking me, he is acting as the KZ Kid and is way stronger than Gaara, he himself admits it. And you couldn't even beat my brother 3 years ago when he wasn't even a cave and didn't has complete control over his sand, she said as he clutched his knuckles, turning white as he remembered his defeat at the hands of Gaara and the power he held all those years ago with the dope matching him. She finally decided to hit the final nail in the coffin. And as to your nameless comment, he himself belongs to the noblest and one of the most royal of the families in the elemental nations, directly related to a cave, and I don't ever remember an Uchiha being the Hokage. She taunted and walked off, leaving a seething Uchiha behind, and knew he had no retort to her words if how strong she said he was, and no Uchiha had really ever made cave in history. A moment later he smirked as he gazed at the walking back of Temari and her curvaceous figure and licked his lips. Yes, she doesn't even care who I am and stands up for herself as well as a skilled kunoichi. You'll be my wife, I'll do everything I can to show you that I am the only one worthy enough, and beat this fiancé of yours to the ground if that's what it takes. The final stage of the Chunin exams are in Suna. I guess I should attend them and has a chat with this mysterious shinobi. He thought, walking off to talk to Shikamaru, knowing the Nara was in charge for the Chunin exams to the leaf, and plotted ways to win her over. Chapter 9. Meanwhile, in the land of wind, 2 figures in black cloaks with red clouds and straw hats were walking in the desert amidst the sandy winds as their cloaks blew, and they kept walking to the village hidden in the sand. The peaceful village of the sand had no idea of the dangers that loomed over them as the village walls came into view, and both figures smirked beneath their cloaks. Sunegaku no Sato. Naruto was going through the paperwork with 7 of his shadow clones working alongside him and was confused as to why Gaara kept calling it a demon spawn. He guessed it must be so easy because the council took care of the details and he just had to go through reading and signing them only. Again in Konoha, a certain redhead had the urge to kill Azumaki, but didn't get why he was suddenly having these desires. He was getting bored and didn't get how Gaara kept himself locked up in this room with just paperwork, with only Matsuri to talk to. She too only talked about the official stuff and was way too boring. He wanted his Haim to come back and kiss her like there was no tomorrow and hold her in his arms as he sat there listening to the civilian talking about admitting his son and daughter into the Shinobi Academy, and he smiled at the father. Of course he can join. I'll talk to the council about those rules that civilians can't join the Shinobi Academy, he said, and the father smiled gratefully, then spoke nervously. KZ Kid-sama, she is my only daughter and is too innocent to the killing tasks of the shinobi life, but I only has a small merchant business and want her to be a shinobi too, has a good life and look after herself like her mother wanted her to, but is there any way that she could join and not get involved in the gorier aspects of the shinobi life? He asked nervously, and Naruto gave him a warm smile, making the man lessen his nervousness, but was scared as Naruto stood up and crouched down in front of the little girl with a teddy in her hand and patted her head, making her smile. What's your name, my cute little angel? He asked softly, and she smiled, blushing a bit as she looked at his whiskers, and rubbed them with her little hands, smiling cutely at him as he smiled in an amused way, making her father scared, knowing he was the current KZ Kid. This was why he had come. He had been too scared to approach Gaara since he remembered his old reputation and was scared of him, but he jumped at the chance of talking to a new KZ Kid and was ecstatic that a mere commoner like him was given an instant appointment. Naruto turned to the man and stood confidently, making him gulp and put a shoulder on his hand. Don't worry, there are many branches like the barrier team, the sealing team, or even the medical squad, and various other branches that involve almost zero killing, but she will be trained to kill to protect herself if she wants to be a kunoichi. That is something I cannot help with, if you still wish for her to join the academy. He was cut off as the man shook his hand. That would be great, Kazekid-sama, you are very generous to go out of your way for a civilian like me, he said gratefully, and Naruto smiled and shook his head. Every villager is my responsibility, do not be scared to come to me, even if I am not the Kazekid, then I'll help you in any way I can. That is the way our village will work under me, everyone is equal whether a clan head or a civilian. If there is potential, then we will bring it out. The Yondem Hokage was but an orphan of a small clan in the Leaf, but is still regarded as their strongest shinobi to breathe, who is to know that this little girl might not be the next Kazekid. He said as the girl grinned and he fist bumped her as the man left happily, thanking him, and Naruto sat down making a document to order her admission to the academy. The academy came under the Kazekid, and was a shinobi affair, so the council could suggest, but he had the final say and he would let anyone who wished get a chance. After all, he himself was a clanless orphan for 13 years, he mused, and if not to the old man he would never has made a shinobi. He thought, remembering about the Sandaime Hokage and the times he spent with him fondly. He was surprised at how many civilians wanted to become a part of the less violent shinobi branches, but were scared of the laws put in by the Yondem Kazekid and the killing image of Gaara, but were seeing their hope in him. He signed another admission paper, and kept it in the growing pile that had already reached to a couple dozen since yesterday, and smiled. So much young, untapped talent and more strength to the village. Suddenly Kyo and Ebizo came in and he motioned them a seat, gazing at their sudden appearance curiously. What can I do for you, Kyo-sama and Ebizo-chan? He asked politely, and they smiled at the polite and affectionate name. They were pretty close with all the time they spent together to the ceiling branches, and told him stories of his parents, and he considered them family. Kazekid-sama, we has received many admissions of civilian children by your orders since yesterday and came to talk about it, she said, and he raised an eyebrow and nodded. Yes, I just cleared another child with the will to join one of our less violent department. I thought it would be better for us to has more shinobi for support lines in the future, that will aid the frontline fighters, and they all came willingly, so I assumed it wasn't a problem. And I thought we did need to strengthen our forces too, he asked, and they smiled at his words. No, Kazekid-sama, actually the council is quite happy, and we has encouraged the civilians for a while, under Godame's reign and the removal of his father's laws and clan preferences, but they were still afraid of him, and the new admissions are a great welcome, and you has been cleared complete authority for the academy admissions to now, said Kyo, and he smiled in surprise and nodded, happy that he was of help. They got up, and just as they were about to leave, Kyo turned around and saw him working determined as he signed the admission paper. She saw an image of Minato Namikaze beside him and saw how similar they were, and how they could get the best out of everyone. The Namikazes were natural leaders, he thought, and smiled fondly. He caught her gaze and questioned her. Something the matter, Bar-sama? He asked, and she smiled and shook her head. Nothing, just went down the memory lane, she said happily, and left a confused blonde behind who shrugged and got back to work. An hour later a blast rocked the village as he felt the tremors and instantly got up, flaring his chakra in a coded seal on the desk, attuned to the current Kazekid, as the Unbu commander appeared and kneeled in front of him. Dragon, what the hell was that just now? He asked in an authoritative voice, and he bowed his head and answered stoically. Kazekid-sama, the village walls has been breached. There is a blonde man on a strange bird with a black cloak and red clouds over it, and is wearing a straw hat concealing his face. He is throwing some strange bombs around the village, he said, and Naruto cursed under his breath. They are the Akatsuki Dragon. Evacuate the civilians to underground shelters and order everyone above down in to take guard and search the village for another breach. They always travel in pairs and keep them away from doing damage, but do not engage directly. They are all cave-level shinobi, and I do not want unnecessary casualties. Am I clear? He said in an authoritative voice, and Dragon nodded. Dismissed, he said, and he stood up and bowed. Ha, Kazekid-sama, he shouted, and vanished to carry out the orders. Naruto picked up his jacket and instantly put it on, as he undid the seal on the back as the words second Flash were written on the back vertically matching the color of the flames and flicked out a three-pronged kunai and jumped to the top of the roof of the tower and saw the bird coming towards him as Deodara leveled himself to his eye level and Naruto stood spinning the kunai in his finger and stared at him emotionlessly and threw the hat away as the man spoke before setting off several blasts as he saw the smoke come off from some buildings and the scared screams of the civilians. They made you the Kazekage. Well, it makes it more fun to capture a cave with my art UN. He said, chuckling as he threw his hat away and Naruto got a look at his face. He recognized him straight away. Deodara, or was Mad Bomber. An S-class rogue nin wanted for bombing Iwagako no Sato and stealing their kinbutsu to enhance your bloodline. The explosion release. Personally trained by the Sandaime Tsuchikage himself and were the prime candidate to the Yondem before going rogue. He recited his bingo book entry as Deodara chuckled. Are the good old days and performances of my art. He said, chuckling. But I'm honored that you know my every detail. Chubby brat, now come with me, so we can leave the village in peace and there won't be any casualties. He said, and Naruto stared at him blankly, still spinning his kunai. Sorry, but that is not an option. You has already invaded and attacked the village and I have to capture or kill you as the current Kazekage. He said as another Akatsuki member landed beside him, one which he didn't recognize. I'm sorry, but I don't recognize you. He said coldly to the new figure and Sasori spoke up. I'm Sasori of the Red Sands, you should know, being the Kazekage and all, though I am happy to take down another Kazekage. He said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes at his statement, knowing this fight just got a lot more serious with him. He knew who he was, Kiyobara-sama's grandson and the prodigy of the art of puppetry before he used humans for his puppets. She had told him all about him, and he was another S-class prodigy that went rogue for power. Suddenly the Thounin commander landed beside him in a defensive stance as Naruto spoke up. Stay back and provide cover from far away. This isn't a battle that you would help in, you'll only be a liability. Try and keep out of the way and don't let civilians come to harm. Form a perimeter and your priority is containment. He said, and the man was about to protest when he gazed in those cold eyes and nodded, stepping back and carrying out his orders. Sasori Dana, why did you come to the battle? I could take care of him myself. Asked Deodara, and Sasori spoke. I heard he was named a temporary Kazekage, so I came. We will get this done right and it seems he will be fun to fight, and a good model for a new puppet. He said, and Deodara chuckled and nodded. Kyubi Venturikai still has a chance to come peacefully, or the village will suffer. He spoke before Naruto flared up his chakra and flicked out another three-pronged kunai, getting into a stance showing them their answer. He chucked a kunai just ahead of Sasori's feet and Deodara chuckled. Hey kid, get your eyes checked and wear some glasses, your aim is pathetic. Laughed Deodara, and Naruto smirked as he formed a Rasengan in his free hand. And they got into their battle stances when Naruto suddenly disappeared in a yellow flash, making Deodara's eyes widen in horror as he gazed at the dreaded kunai at Sasori's feet. And the stories of the Third Shinobi World War came to his mind and he shouted. Sasori, jump away from. He couldn't finish as Naruto appeared in front of Sasori in a yellow flash as Sasori tried to jump back, but was too late as Naruto smashed his chakra ball into the Herko puppet and it was splintered and crushed as Sasori left it and jumped back, showing his real form, and was seething at the destruction of his beloved puppet. Rasengan! Naruto shouted, as he splintered the middle of the puppet into oblivion. The Thounin surrounding the battlefield were wide-eyed as their Kazekage stood up, his hair flowing in the wind, as he chucked the kunai he threw before from the ground, and spun them around, holding them in a reverse grip in his hand. A moment later they broke out of their stupors as they cheered, watching their cave take charge, and their confidence soared. That's right, let's go Kazekage-sama. One of them cheered as they roared in applause. Yes, Kazekage-sama, we'll take them down, we can't lose even if they are so strong. Another cheered as their confidence soared, and Naruto stood and stared at Sasori's original form. So that's your real face? I thought why you looked so ugly, and now I know you are hiding behind that pathetic doll. He said emotionlessly as Sasori's blood boiled. That blonde brat was getting on his nerves. How dare you insult my art? He hissed and turned to Deodara, who was staring wide-eyed at Naruto. And Deodara, what the hell was that jutsu? You recognized it, so tell me. He growled and saw him staring at him in fear. He watched confused as he shook his shoulder and Deodara looked at him breaking out of his stupor and answered his question. Sasori-senpai, every shinobi in Iwagako and Kumikaku knows and fears that jutsu. He said, and Sasori was confused. If it was so damn famous, then why hadn't he seen it before in action? Don't you recognize those kunai, Sasori-senpai? Those are the Yondem Hokage's kunai. He obliterated our enemies in the Third War and won the whole war by himself using that accursed jutsu. He said in a trance and fear in his voice as his eyes were locked onto the kunai, and the stories that Onoki had told him and how much damage those dreaded knives could cause, and Sasori turned to Naruto surprised, who was standing there emotionlessly as he thought of a strategy to go by. That was the Freishin. How the hell does he know it? I thought that it died with the Yondem Hokage. How does that dead last Jinchuriki know it? He asked Tsunade and Naruto, who stood silently not bothering to reply, and he growled as he took out a scroll from behind in anger. Then I guess it's time to get serious, Kyubi. He seethed and unsealed the puppet, making all of the shinobi gasp and Naruto to narrow his eyes at the puppet. Sandaime-sama. One of them shouted and Naruto realized where he had seen it. He was the same as the statue in the Kazekage Tower, and if he remembered correctly, then the Sandaime went missing in the last war and was the strongest of all the Kazekages in history. Well, now they knew where he went, he mused. Pathetic to think you would desecrate someone's bodies like that. You disgust me to no end, Sasori. It's good that Kyoba-sama is in the shelter and has left fighting, or surely she must have cried tears of blood seeing what you has become. He said, and Sasori chuckled. No one understands true art. Now he will live eternally and has taken the face of true art, he said, chuckling, and Naruto looked at him in disgust. He tried to remember, but couldn't remember anything about the abilities of the Sandaime Kazekage and spoke to the shinobi there. What was the Sandaime famous for? He asked the Thounin surrounding them as he saw Sasori connect the threads to his puppet and Deodara's bird taking off. Sandaime-sama was famous for his feared Kek Thenkai of Beton, iron release. Just like Godame-sama, he controlled sand, but it was made of pure iron, and was poisoned. A mere touch was enough to kill a shinobi. The man said as Naruto jumped back to avoid a hail of poisoned senbon and nodded. That was one hell of a Kek Thenkai, he mused. Now I wish Gaara was here. It would be difficult to take them both on and keep that mad bomber away from civilians at the same time. Let's see if my Freishin can keep up and how far I has come. He thought as he decided to charge and charged at Sasori, who brought the puppet in front of him as he threw a kunai at the puppet, and the puppet released a hail of poisoned senbon from his mouth. He disappeared in a yellow flash, avoiding the senbon, and caught the flying kunai in mid-air just as it reached the puppet as he slashed the other kunai horizontally. When the puppet took out two swords from its sleeves and slashed, making an X, and he blocked one and jumped back, cursing from getting his arm slashed as he saw a little insect falling from above and was confused as to the strange white creature when he suddenly saw it glow and pumped chakra to his feet, cracking the ground with the force, and jumped back as the insect blew up, and he looked up at the chuckling Deodara with narrowed eyes. You like my arte, Kyubi? He said in chuckles as his eyes widened when he saw hundreds of small insects flowing out from his hand to the evacuating civilians. Sasori decided to take advantage of his distraction and charged up his jutsu. Iron release, iron sand drizzle, said Sasori as suddenly black sand covered the puppet and formed small gunshot like balls and moved forward at blazing speeds, and Naruto thought about what to do. He saw the civilians and the reaching bombs, and then the black gunshots coming at him from behind, and growled. Damn it to hell! He shouted as he clapped his hands and molded a huge amount of chakra together, and the little moisture in the air started joining together, forming droplets, and swirled around, forming a large swirl of water, as he went through blazing fast hand seals and ended at Tori. Water style. Water severing wave. He shouted as a huge tidal wave of water formed around him and moved forward in blazing speeds, washing away the iron sand bullets from the huge pressure of the chakra-infused water as he held the ram hand seal. By Chach, you won't touch anyone on my watch. He shouted in focus and strain as the huge tidal wave turned around and washed over the civilians, not touching them, and washed away the small bombs that detonated in the air. And he smirked as he panted a bit, and the whole battlefield stood in stunned silence at seeing the brilliant display of skills. That's the way, show them, Naruto-sama, shouted a small child from the civilian group, and they erupted in cheers at seeing the brilliant display of water. Elemental manipulation as the water drizzled over them, making them wet. The shinobi was stunned at the huge scale of a water ninjutsu never seen before in Suna and erupted in applause at seeing their Kazekage smirking as he looked at the stunned Akatsuki members. Such mastery over the water element to create water out of this dry air and to manipulate it in between the jutsu and turning it as he wills. That takes away his water-style handicap. Both Akatsuki members thought in unison, as they turned to Naruto, now taking him really seriously after seeing the display of power by the blonde. This was the blonde idiot that only made shadow clones only 3 years ago. They cursed Kisame for his stupid deduction of getting their hopes high. The damn brat had used 2S rank, one of them bordering ETS and 1 high A rank ninjutsu, and the fight had just started. They were broken out of their thoughts as Naruto spoke up. "What happened? Cat caught your tongue, or do you now realize what true art is?" He taunted mockingly, and both of them growled at his insult as panted and Naruto wiped the sweat of his brow. "God damn it, that was my strongest S-rank water ninjutsu that the Nidaime used to wipe off battlefields, and I was only able to stop those 2 small attacks, and the strain from turning it to my will is too much, but I can't let them hurt innocents because they came after me." He thought as the pressure of the battle was kicking in and his battle instincts were now riled up as he calmed his breathing down and stared at them emotionlessly. "I'll show you true art, Kyubi brat," he said as the Kazekage puppet swirled around and collected the black sand together, and Deidara put his hands in his hip pouch preparing the clay in his palms as they both shouted their jutsus at the same time, trying to overpower him. Iron release gathering assault/explosive clay, C2 dragon. Both shouted at the same time as the black sand of the Kazekage puppet joined together to form a huge prism-like spear, and Deidara brought both of his palms forward and released a C2-powered clay dragon down to Naruto, who, seeing the size, knew the dragon would level a small part near the Kazekage tower as he started going through hand signs, and water around him swirled as he again ended at Tori. "Water style. Water dragon jutsu," he declared as a water dragon rose from the earlier collection of drizzled water twice the amount of Deidara's dragon size, and the spear behind him came to pierce him, and Sasori smirked. "It's over now, Kyubi brat, you can't save the village and yourself at the same time," said Sasori, and Naruto smirked as 4 adamantine chains shot out from his back and held the spear back inches from his back, and he threw a 3-pronged kunai at a nearby roof and disappeared in a yellow flash and appeared over it panting as he saw that the area around them was now mostly cleared, and he could now focus on the battle completely. Suddenly hundreds of small clay bombs appeared over him, and his eyes widened as he didn't have time to repel it or throw a kunai to flash away that far to escape it as he heard a shout. "Wind style. Wind Scythe Jutsu." He heard as the bombs were flown to Sasori, who jumped back from the explosion as he saw his Vounins appear beside him and smiled at them, giving them a nod, who nodded back. "We'll distract the flying one, Kazekage-sama, you deal with Sasori of the Red Sands. You can't fight them both and protect the village at the same time," said the Vounin commander, and he nodded as they launched themselves on their fans and flew to a high rooftop, engaging Deidara, and turned to Sasori. "I must say you has proved to be a really worthy opponent, Kyubi Venturikai," he said, and Naruto stared at him blankly as he saw the black sand starting to divide and form different piercing prisms, and cursed at that damned ability that wasn't letting him get anywhere close to him. "Come and let's settle this," said Sasori as he threw a handful of kunai at the roofs nearby, and the ones going to Sasori were blocked by his black sand. He charged up 2 Raisingans as Sasori narrowed his eyes in concentration at every kunai as Naruto disappeared in a yellow flash and appeared near a kunai and flashed away again as a spear pierced where he was, and he kept it up flashing again, and he came near the puppet and charged at it and slammed the Rasengan in it when it grinded into a wall of black sand blocking his attack, and jumped back, avoiding a spear trying to pierce him, and he threw a kunai through the small created by his Rasengan in the black sand wall as he started adding wind chakra to the Rasengan left in his hand, and disappeared in a yellow flash as a spear staked the place where he was a moment ago and caught his thrown kunai near the puppet's face and slammed his wind-style Rasengan in front of him, and again a coating of black sand covered the puppet, and Sasori smirked. "You won't get through that iron defense, Kyubi. It's even stronger than the one the Ichibi uses," he said, laughing as Naruto charged it up and pumped it with more chakra as he focused everything into it. "Ch-ch-ch," he shouted as the Rasengan glowed a brilliant white and started grinding through the iron sand defense, and Sasori's eyes widened in horror as he tried to move it away, but it was too late. "Eat this wind style, Rasengan," He shouted as he slammed it, tearing right through the puppet, splintering it into oblivion, as it grinded every part of it, and tore it right through the middle. Sasori's eyes widened in horror, as he saw that damn brat tear apart his beloved Sandaime Kazekage puppet, and he turned furious. How dare you destroy my precious piece of art? That was an exquisite puppet you destroyed. Damn the extraction too, hell you are gonna die. He roared as he threw away his cloak, and Naruto's eyes widened to see his body completely mechanized and turned into a puppet. Sasori opened his chest cavity and took out his last scroll from behind. Red secret technique, performance of 100 puppets. He shouted as 100 puppets puffed into existence from the scroll, and chakra threads shot out of his chest cavity, and connected to the puppets as they flew in the air. And Sasori laughed as Naruto stood panting and gazed at the flying deadly army stoically and listened to his taunt. Now I'll show you true strength, Kyuubi brat. This is the special technique I used to take down a small village. Be honored that you has pushed me to be forced to use this technique. He said, laughing manically as Naruto put a hand in his hip pouch and took out his kunai in both his hands and gazed at them. Only 4 left. Well, only has one chance to do it right. Let's see if I really has mastered the Hreishin to the level he used at his peak of strength. He thought as he closed his eyes in concentration, ignoring the laugh coming from his opponent, and calmed himself down as he remembered the words his father wrote to the deadliest technique that he used in the Third Great Shinobi World War at Kanobi Bridge. Close your eyes and forget your emotions completely. It takes focus like no other technique, but if used can obliterate armies by itself. Forget everything and imagine, there is only one thing with you, the flash, you and the targets. Focus on each and every beacon like a grid and break the forces down strategically. I know of only one person who I trust will inherit this technique from me, my son. Use it wisely, for it is a technique that turns the tides of war and is way too powerful if used by the wrong hands for the wrong purposes. Make me proud and inherit my legacy, my son. He recited those words in his head as he pocketed 2 kunai and threw a couple of them forward at the army, as Sasori laughed at the pathetic attempt to fight an army by himself. No matter how strong he was, there was no chance. His musings were cut off as he heard a shout. Ninja Art Kunai Cave Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto shouted after going through blazing fast hand seals as he pumped up enough chakra to match half of his reserves that were left, and the kunai multiplied in 1,000 and rained down over the 100 puppets as they embedded themselves in many parts of each of his puppet, and he turned wide-eyed at Naruto, who stared at him icily, making him feel something he hadn't felt in years: fear. He stared into those eyes, and the next words he spoke made his heart skip a beat. Your technique took down a small village, right? He asked the stunned Sasori and continued. My father used this technique to obliterate entire battalions of shinobi in the Third Great Shinobi World War and won the war all on his own, getting the name Yellow Flash. Be honored today, you'll witness the second Flash, he said as the fight between Deidara and the Thounins had stopped to see the army that Sasori had produced, and the Thounins were worried sick for their Kazekage seeing him getting cornered. And Deidara wanted to witness his senpai's ultimate art, but what happened next made their blood run cold. Naruto took out his last 2 3-pronged kunai and held them in a reversed grip, as he channeled wind chakra through the blades, elongating them as they glowed. A light blue and hummed as power coursed through them and stared at Sasori with such cold eyes that he almost shivered. Don't blink. Naruto whispered as he disappeared in a yellow flash, and everyone saw as several flashes of yellow lights lit up the sky, and one by one the puppets started breaking up and tearing apart. Naruto's mind went into a trance as he flashed again, and his wind chakra, charged kunai cut through the puppets like hot knife through butter. He didn't even see what was happening. He was moving too fast. Everything seemed to be a blur as his hands swung on their own, and he didn't even realize how many times he flashed as Sasori saw his army being taken down in mere moments. He didn't even realize when his final puppet fell and when a kunai was thrown at his feet and when Naruto's last wind chakra charged kunai pierced through his chest. He gazed into those icy blue eyes as his vision blurred and he uttered his final words. That is true art, he whispered, and Naruto let the kunai go as Sasori fell backwards with a thump and he fell down to his knee, panting heavily as his mind spun from the strain and blood leaked from the sides of his mouth as he whispered. Hreishin level 3 flash step, he whispered to himself as the whole crowd of shinobi and civilians who were watching from afar roared in happiness. Naruto-sama. Amazing, he took down the whole army on his own. That's the way Kazekage-sama. There is no way he could lose, he is invincible. All he could see in his death was just a flash. The village is safe as long as we has him. He heard the shouts and cheers from afar as he saw the looks of pure admiration from the Thaunins and civilians and the look of terror on Deodara's face, as he gazed at the sky with his eyes closed and smiled, feeling the breeze flowing in his hair, and his jacket flew as the words "second flash" were now earned to be worn by him on his back. "I did it too, son, I finally did it. Are you proud of me today?" he thought to himself, as he gazed at the last shining three-pronged kunai in his hand and smiled as he stood up and stared at Deodara, who took a step back in fear of the blonde unconsciously. Those eyes were the eyes that were making him see his death if he continued fighting any longer. Not even Itaki had made him feel such fear, and neither did he possess the skills to take down Sasori's army down in seconds. That brat took down Sasori's puppet army all on his own. He really is the son of that bastard Namikaze. Even in death his accursed son still haunts a shinobi now. There is no way I can take him down on my own and capture him fighting my way through the village security. I have to retreat and create a big enough distraction, he thought as he took out a small clay doll from his hip pouch, which he brought as a last resort, and was cursing that he was pushed to use it and held it in his hands, as he smirked at Naruto and channeled almost all of his remaining chakra in the doll. "You has gotten really strong, Kyubi brat. To say that I do not fear you now would be lying. What you showed me was true art, and I respect true art when I see it, and I know that is what Sasori thought in his last moments too. But now let's see you save the village from this," he said as he dropped the small doll and held a ram hand seal as the doll began to grow to epic proportions, and his eyes widened in horror as it turned as big as the Kazekage Tower. "Ha, eat this, Kyubi brat. As soon as it touches the ground, the payload will wipe out half the village. Now this is my true art, because art is an explosion," he said, and laughed manically as the whole village and shinobi shouted in terror, knowing there was no way they could survive such a big blast, and Deodara flew away in the confusion and escaped the village. Naruto saw the mass panic and channeled chakra to his throat, making his voice boom loudly to be heard by the whole village. "Everybody get down. If you want to live, lie down on the street face down right now," he shouted authoritatively, and the whole village grew silent as they heard their cage's loud order, and did as he told as he channeled chakra to his feet, cracking the ground from the sudden burst of chakra, and jumped up high in the air, pumping chakra to his legs and through the kunai to the roof where the bomb would make its first contact and go off, and disappeared in a yellow flash appearing over it. Everyone peeked at their Kazekage from their lying positions as they saw him gazing up at the falling, huge bomb calmly, and were worried at what he was about to do as he picked a kunai from the ground and was glad that he had one left and put it in his index finger and started going through hand seals. Tusan said that it could absorb and deflect even the strongest of the attacks that the Bivouac made, so this shouldn't be difficult either, he thought as he ended at bore and snapped his palms upwards, and candy spread out from them into thin air as the huge bomb made contact with the candy, and the bomb stopped and started getting absorbed into it. Everyone's eyes widened in disbelief as they saw Naruto's jutsu absorbing the huge bomb. Sweat ran down his head as he pumped every last bit of chakra into the jutsu, as the candy glowed from the strain to the point of breaking. The strain of using such high-level jutsu so frequently back to back was straining even his chakra coils to the limits. But he kept pumping the chakra to the jutsu as his heartbeat was now escalating and he was panting heavily. Just a bit more, he thought, pumping more chakra, as finally it was all absorbed and he flicked his kunai into his palms and the candy disappeared in a yellow flash, and the whole village's eyes widened in disbelief when they suddenly heard a huge explosion go off at a far-off point in the desert. Naruto saw the huge explosion as a sand wave kicked the village, and he covered his eyes to see a mushroom-shaped dust cloud where the blast occurred. "Space-time teleportation barrier," he whispered as he saw a part of the village walls crack from the tremors they felt, and everyone stood up as they saw their cave standing there calmly when the Unbu commander and Thaunin commander appeared in front of him, gazing at the man in awe and respect. He didn't let those two even touch a single civilian and saved half the village from near destruction, standing face to face against such a powerful jutsu, and his eyes that were showing them the confidence he held made them bow down to the man in front of them. "Dragon," he whispered in a strained voice from the shout he made to the villagers earlier, and Dragon immediately stiffened and kneeled. "Ha, Kazekage-sama," he shouted, and Naruto smiled a bit. "Send a message to the Leaf and recall Gaara immediately. You are in charge, until he returns, as I won't be able to watch over the village for a few days. He said, his vision blurring, and both men listening were confused and about to ask what he meant when he started falling forwards and Dragon rushed up and caught him in his arms. He put him down gently and saw that he was fully drained and heavily wounded from the slight scars, and the skin was poisoned, showing a bit of the blue color, where Sasori's sand grazed him as a crowd began surrounding them, and Dragon shouted, "Medic SS!" He shouted as everyone watched their beloved hero worriedly. Chapter 10. Konohagakure no Sato. Temari walked through the streets back towards the hotel, her mood completely ruined by that damned Uchiha and his overgrown ego. She was actually happy that Itaki had massacred the whole clan. If all of them were stuck-up pricks like that bastard, then she held no ill will to him. She would have done it herself if she had to live with so many bastards at once. No wonder he had cracked, she mused, and walked back to the hotel room. She went in and saw Gaara and Kankuro, almost ready to leave, and they smiled at seeing her. "Yo Temari, where were you? It's almost time to go. I thought we would have had to leave without you," said Kankuro, and she frowned and answered, "That bastard Uchiha came stalking me at the training grounds and it took me some time to tell him off," she said in disgust, and the room was filled with killing intent courtesy of Gaara. "Did he give you any troubles?" he asked, and his voice was hollow, showing the bloodlust, and she smiled and shook her head. "I can take care of myself, Gaara, don't worry, and I told him off good," she said, and he nodded as he calmed down, and Kankuro sighed in relief. "Let's go and get the council meeting done with," said Gaara, and Temari and Kankuro nodded, moving out of the hotel and started walking down to the Hokage Tower. Hokage Tower. Council chambers. The council was sitting waiting for the delegation from Sunna to arrive, and were whispering to each other about the alliance terms and how to add some points that would benefit them greatly in the future. The elders were greatly discussing of all the possible gains from the marriage alliance, with Wave and Spring become their allies again, and them gaining Sunna's newfound sealing skills and the upgraded barrier and security seals. Tsunade was listening, all of their rants greatly annoyed on the inside at their glimmering eyes, and almost drooling faces of the whole council. Power-hungry bastards. They would sell their own children if it meant a bit more power to them. She thought, annoyed as she listened to Kaha and Homura rant to her with a fake smile, and nodded, not caring in the least what the old coots were ranting on about. She was wondering about Temari and her unusual behavior from the previous day, and knew that she wholeheartedly loved her fiancé if her glances were any indication. She herself, being a woman, knew when a girl would give those glances and blushes meant that she loved him dearly, and if what she knew and deducted was right, then it was that new prodigy and their currently temporary Kazekage. But the thing that kept bugging her from yesterday was the design of that damn ring. She was definitely sure that it was platinum ring in the shape of a nine-tailed fox with that blood-red diamond haunting her dreams last night. But why would she wear such a strangely designed ring unless it meant something to her or her fiancé? The only person that could associate greatly with the king of the demons was. Can it be? Is he alive and well in Sunna? I hope he is. Please Kami, let him be happy if he is there. I only wish he could be alive and live happily there. It's the least I could do to make up for my powerlessness all those years ago. She thought sadly, with a little bit of hope that her little blonde Gaki could be alive. She was broken out of her thoughts as the doors to the chambers opened and in walked the Sunna delegation. The whole room went silent as they had huge smiles plastered on their faces that made Temari feel disgusted, as many of them were staring at her as if she was a piece of meat that they could sell for a big profit. Temari and Gaara took their seats in front of the council as she crossed one leg over the other, crossing her fingers and masking a blank look on her face. Kaha, seeing the silence, decided to start the talks from the previous day. Kazekage Dono, as we have talked yesterday, we are proposing to create a long-term alliance that we has proposed to solidify through a political marriage between your sister Temari and Sasuke Uchiha from our side, the last loyal Uchiha and a clan head himself. The terms that we present to you are on the paper there, she said, snapping her fingers as an Unbu handed Gaara a scroll, which he handed to Temari, knowing that she was the most ruthless negotiator. The Sanhad and was the reason of the strong alliances with the Spring and Wave. Temari took the scroll and started reading it and concentrated on each and every word as she saw that it was full of garbage, pints wherein between some there were some finally put in points that made her eyebrows furrow, and she took a pencil from the table and started underlining those intelligently put in points in smart words that would be missed by anyone who didn't have the skills she had at negotiations. She finished reading and reread it to see if she hadn't misread anything, and her blood boiled at seeing the fine points that were completely tilting the alliance in their favor. She handed the scroll to Gara and gazed at the council, who were all there with smiles plastered on their faces. And she smiled back as she thought of the fools they were thinking they could outwit her and were thinking of them as stupid due to their young age. Gara took the scroll and saw how much time it took Temari and started reading the small underlined sentences that she had marked and started reading over them and saw she had made some fine notes beside them. The Leaf Shoal has a mutual alliance with the Wave and Spring and any other trading allies the Sand might come across in the future. The Leaf shall share their information on seals with the Sand, and the same shall be done from the side of the hidden Sand village. The security systems of the two villages shall be up to par with each other to show the strength of the villages to the enemies. Missions from the trading partners shall be shared between the two villages to help solidify the alliance. The Leaf shall provide the strength to the Sand in war times, and the same shall be done from the side of the Sand village. Temari shall has traveling rights to both the villages to travel freely, but their children shall be complete citizens of the Leaf. She shall provide with enough heirs to repopulate the Uchiha clan back to glory. Both villages will share their strategic intel on common enemies and will exchange prisoners the other village requires for. Leaf shall provide with its native resources, and the same shall be done from the side of the Sand at a price pre-disclosed by the Leaf. The Leaf will provide with the militaristic strength the Sand needs in times of extreme stressful situations. The Leaf shall provide the Sand with some medical knowledge to increase the medical prowess of the Sand. Gara clutched the scroll tightly in his hands as he read the fine notes written by his sister, and turned to the elders, smiled and gave them a death glare, making them shiver. He was barely stopping himself from crushing the council in his sand. So let me get this straight, he said stoically as they listened carefully. The Leaf gets our prowess in seals and our security system and barrier skills, our missions and our trade alliances with our allies, my sister's hand in marriage to the last Uchiha, who you are planning for breeding purposes, our resources at pre-disclosed prices. He finished as Tsunade was wide-eyed and slammed her hand on her desk, startling the council. None of these points were discussed with me. How dare you change and add so many points without my permission? She asked coldly as the whole council shivered from the killing intent she released, and Kahar tried to calm the situation down. Now Tsunade, we added them for the betterment of both our villages and show the alliance and our villages stand strong together, she said as Gara cut her off as he spoke up. Oh, the Sand benefits quite a bit, alright. The only thing I see in our favor is that Temari gets dual citizenship, but her children are loyal citizens to the Leaf, your militaristic help and some medical knowledge that you shall decide on how much to share. Do you take us the fools? He asked coldly as both the cages glared and leaked their killing intents at the council, making them gulp. Kazekid Dono, we can discuss these points and negotiate these points further. There is no need for any hard words, she said, trying to calm him down, but failing miserably. All the while the whole council was cursing Temari and her sharp eyes to deduce each and every point to perfection, and catch on to their ploys. Danzo too was seething at the plan to get their children to the village with their precious Kek Thenkai and strong royal blood loyal to the Leaf and their prowess of seals and barrier security, and that they had caught on to his points that he had put in so carefully after discussing it with the shinobi clan heads who themselves wanted to propose future marriages between their children and Temari's to strengthen their own clans. Tsunade was gritting her teeth at how they were screwing up the relations with the last neutral village. She was about to reprimand the council as Gara stood up and threw the scroll in front of her, landing on her desk. It is clear that your village is taking me and my sister for a young fool, Hokid Dono. I'm sorry, but there shall be no marriage with my sister, or any shinobi from the Sand after this. I was already against this political marriage, but you have just destroyed the chance for a good alliance to strengthen both of our villages, he said coldly, and she stood up with an apologetic face, glaring at the council, who were about to whine and protest at the fact that he had outright rejected the last Uchiha in marriage and shutting them up. I apologize, Kazekid Dono. These points were added without my knowledge, believe me. Do not act in haste. Our villages has been old comrades in arms and has seen many wars together and come out winning. I don't care for this political marriage, but the alliance is a must for both our village's strengths. She said apologetically and with a genuine sorry face. Your council's actions state otherwise, Hokiv Dono. He said, and she cut him off. Yes, I agree, Kazikid Dono. I has allowed them way too much leeway for too long, and it's about time that matters were taken into my own hands. Please believe me when I say I had the best of intentions for this alliance for both sides, and please do not make both villages suffer because of some fools. She said, and he stood in silence for a few moments as he sighed, when Temuri put a hand over his shoulder telling him to do what he thought was right. Very well then, Hokiv Dono. I trust you on your word, and you're alone. He said, glaring at the council, who flinched and smartly said nothing. If you genuinely care for your village and this alliance, then we shall continue these talks during the third part of the Chunin exams that will be held in the sand. I has appointed Temuri as the liaison for the first two parts of the exams in the leaf, and she will be the head for planning the third part too. We shall continue these talks then. For now, let's discuss the matter of the Chunin exams then. He was saying as suddenly the door to the chambers opened abruptly, and in came running a Chunin, and this infuriated Sinead to no end, who was already in a foul mood. She slammed her fist on the desk, cracking it, and leaked her killing intent at the Chunin, who gulped and was trembling in fear of the furious blonde Hokiv. I swear this village is taking me too lightly, and insubordination is now becoming a habit here. Chunin. Whoever the hell you are better has a good reason for barging in a council meeting with the Kazikid so abruptly, or I swear I'll break your ribs, heal them and break them again until I can't anymore. She said icily as the Chunin gulped, wondering what the hell had he done wrong to get such a death threat, and the whole council was trying to sink in their seats, not wanting to come into her vision. Gara and Temuri was smiling at Sinead, seeing her take charge for the first time like a true cage. Hokiv Sama T, there is an urgent message from T the Sand sent with T, their fastest sea carrier bird used to emergencies. It is sealed with a really high level blood seal attuned only to Kazikid Sama. He stuttered out in fear as Sinead calmed down and took deep breaths. She had blown up on an innocent Chunin, who was doing his job right to once in this goddamned village, and nodded, taking the scroll as he ran out in fear, and she sighed, handing the scroll to Gara. Gara took the scroll and wondered what the hell was so urgent to send a secured letter to him so urgently. As you makey, you better not has blown up a part of the village and given me some paperwork, or I swear I'll get you before Temuri stops me. He thought, biting his thumb, and smeared it on the scroll as it glowed, and the seals disappeared, and the scroll flicked open. As he read its contents, his blood ran cold with every sentence. Gara-sama, the village was invaded yesterday by the Akatsuki. Naoto-sama took on the invaders that were identified as Deodara, or was Mad Bomber, and Sasori of the Red Sands. They engaged Naoto-sama, but he held them back and secured the village. Sasori is now Kia, and Deodara has escaped without a trace by using a distraction to blow up half the village, which Naoto-sama took care of. But Naoto-sama was injured by the poison of Sasori and is unconscious. His demonic chakra is taking care of the poison, but it will take some time, seeing the potency of the poison and how less chakra he had due to suffering from severe chakra exhaustion during the battle, and his body is too strained to use that much demony chakra at once to heal him completely, and is healing slowly. The medics say he'll be fine, but as per his last orders, I has been ordered to recall you immediately and am taking care of the village until you return, or Naoto-sama wakes up. The village is in a state of emergency protocol, and we wait for your return. There were no casualties and minimal damage to the village, as Naoto-sama defended everyone with great courage and skills. Dragon, Unbu Commander. Gara stood there frozen as he reread the letter, and his eyes were wide as saucers and held an expression of disbelief on his face as Sinead and Temuri saw it and wondered what the hell had gotten into him. Temuri shook his shoulder and he flinched a bit, and then channeled wind chakra in his palms, shredding the message completely, and stood up, shocking the whole council. I'm sorry, Hokiv Dono, but we have to return to the village immediately. There is a matter of great importance in the village that needs me back, he said, and Sinead was shocked as she saw the stoic Gara in haste and hurry to leave. Is everything all right, Kazikid Dono? She asked, and he sighed as he saw the curious eyes of everyone, including Temuri. The Sand Village was invaded yesterday by the Akatsuki, he said as they all went wide-eyed, and Danzo smirked at their foolishness. The Vinchurakai wasn't even in the village at the time they invaded, but they would have made quite a lot of damage, if his worry was any indication. Who were the invaders Kazekid Dono? Asked Hayashi as everyone looked on curiously. Deodara, or was Mad Bomber and Sasori of the Red Sands? He said, shocking the whole council. Both of them were capable of destroying small villages on their own, and were now wondering how much damage the village must have suffered before they went out, but were shocked as he continued. My friend that I left as the Kazekid in my stead fought them both to a standstill. He said, shocking the council as they wondered how skilled he must have been when he continued. He killed Sasori, but Deodara escaped by creating a distraction, and he made sure there were no casualties in the battle and that the damage to the village was kept at a minimum. He is unconscious and is recovering from the battle, and I has been recalled to the village to take charge. He finished as the whole room became deathly silent, and Shikaki spoke up as his laziness lay forgotten by the news he heard. Wait, so let me get this straight. Your temporary replacement fought two of the most destructive shinobi capable of Jutsu's 2-level battalions by themselves to a standstill. Then he killed Sasori, while Deodara escaped by a distraction, all the while making sure that not one life was endangered. He asked in a stunned summary, getting a nod in return. Troublesome. He said with a sigh as Inoichi and Shoza snickered, while Tsunade twitched at the laziest comment. Temari, though, was a different case altogether. How is he? She asked, shaking Gaara by his shoulders, who put his hands on her shoulders, calming her down, and saw her watering eyes and trembling bottom lip. He saw that his strong sister was about to cry, and answered her to calm her down. He is fine, Temari. Just a bit poisoned, and he will be fine. You know, a bit of poison isn't enough to keep him down. He'll wake up in a few days. He was cut off as Temari let him go, and her eyes hardened as she slung her fan and started walking out. Temari, where are you going? He asked, and she looked at him as if he was stupid, and he himself felt stupid looking at her expression, but she answered nonetheless. Where do you think I'm going? I'm going to be by my fiancé's side as he is injured. He would do the same to me in a heartbeat, and that's exactly what I'm about to do. She said, and started walking out as he spoke up again along with Danzo. But what about the Chunin exams? You are in charge and need to. Both were cut off as she gazed at them icily, making them both shiver, and Tsunade and the rest of the women in the room to smirk. Now that was a girl who knew what she wanted, and there was no stopping that force of nature. To hell with you, the villages and all your diplomacies. I'm going to his side and am not leaving until I has held him in my arms and made sure he is the same as how I left him. If you want to stop me, then try it. She said, threatening and looking at them icily, and Gaara sighed and turned to Tsunade, who had an amused and proud smirk on her face. Now that was a girl who could stand up for herself in front of two cages, no less, she mused. I'm sorry, Hokage Dono, but it looks like Shikamaru will have to take care of the arrangements for a few days until she can return back. He said apologetically as he saw Temari walk out without even listening to his decision, and sighed, face palming, while Kankuro snickered. It's quite alright, Kazekid Dono. I can see she cares for him deeply, and even if she was forced to stay, her attention would be back Isuna. So Shikamaru can take care of the arrangements and she could review them when she returns. Plus, that lazy ass will has to work for once. She muttered the last part under her breath, getting snickers from those who heard her. Troublesome blondes, said Shikaki, making Tsunade twitch and Kankuro to laugh. You are lucky Temari wasn't here to hear you say that, or things would have gotten out of hand, said Kankuro, laughing as Shikaki sighed. All women were troublesome, especially the hyperactive blondes whose lovers were hurt, he thought. Alright, Kazekid Dono, I guess I'll see you and continue these talks during the third part of the Chunin exams. Don't let me keep you, you must want to leave now, she said with a smile, and Gaara smiled and nodded back gratefully and left after a handshake, as the council members started to leave quietly when Tsunade snapped her fingers and her personal unbu locked the doors, and she turned to them with a really too sweet of a smile with her closed eyes, and a vision of the Shinigami appeared behind her, making them all gulp. Now let's talk about insubordination to a cave and the new rules for the council, she said, smiling sweetly, and they all glanced at each other and nodded nervously to Tsunade, who motioned for them to take a seat. Konohagakure no Sato. Village streets. Sasuke was going through the streets, looking for Shikamaru as he turned to the barbecue place and saw him walking out and smirked at finding him. "Hey Nara, wait up!" he shouted as Shikamaru turned to him with a raised eyebrow and looked around seeing if he really had called him. "What do you want, Uchiha?" he asked neutrally in a dismissive tone, making Sasuke frown, but he shrugged it off seeing he needed the lazy ass for his own purpose now. "Well, I wanted to talk to you about the Chunin exams. You are in charge for them from our village, right?" he asked, and Shikamaru raised an eyebrow and nodded, not seeing where he was going with this. "Yes, I am. What do you want to do with them?" "The last I heard, you thought taking on a Genin team was a waste of time, and not worthy of the last Uchiha's time," he said, making the Uchiha scowl, but he didn't retort and shrugged his tone off. "Yes, well, I was interested in seeing some new talent from the other villages and was curious." "So who is in charge from the Sand this time?" he asked, trying to gather up information. "The last I heard, it was Temari no Sabaku, and she is supposed to meet me today in the evening after her council meeting," he said in a suspicious tone, not believing his answer for his newfound interest, and saw as his eyes brightened up at Temari's name. "Temari her? So what else do you know about her?" he asked curiously, and the Nara's eyes narrowed at the Uchiha. "Where are you going with this, Uchiha? Get to the point," he said in a tone of finality, making Sasuke frown, and he nodded. "I want a way to go to Sand and see the last part of the Chunin exams there. Get me into security, or something else, for the important figures. I don't care what you do, but I want to go to Suna for the exam finals," he said bluntly, and Shikamaru's eyes narrowed further. "Oh, he is strong and we need willing Jounin for security duty and escorts. But that still doesn't answer why he wants to go so badly," he thought, eyeing the Uchiha's face suspiciously. "What with the newfound interest, Sasuke?" he asked, and Sasuke frowned. "I told you I wanted to see new talent from the other." He was cut off as Shikamaru scoffed. "Yeah, you wanted to see Genin fight it out with each other. You could fool anyone else but not me. Tell me the truth if you need my help," he said stoically, and Sasuke was angry at his dismissive tone and answer, but gritted his teeth silently, knowing he was the one in need of a favor right now. "There is a new strong shinobi in the Sand that I have heard much about, and he will definitely be at the exams. I want to check him out," he said, telling him the half-truth, and Shikamaru nodded, knowing he was hiding something else too. "And what's with your interest in knowing about Temari?" he asked, and Sasuke narrowed his eyes and clenched his knuckles at finding his point so easily, but replied honestly. "She intrigues me. I want to get to know her better too. She is not like the pathetic Fangols of our age, and is a true kunoichi. She laughs at my clan status and isn't afraid to talk or fight me back if she wants, and is beautiful too. She has royal heritage, holds herself in strength and power with elegance of a fine woman, and I am interested in her and want to get close to her. She is perfect to me and I like her. Going to Suna serves me two purposes at once. There you has the truth from me," he said, making Shikamaru frown in jealousy, but he smirked a moment later, making Sasuke confused. "So she told you off, right? You went to talk to her and she blew the great Uchiha off without a thought, and it hurts your pride," he said smugly, getting a chance to poke the Uchiha, who fumed as he remembered the conversation he had with the Sand Princess. "Are you going to help me or not?" he asked finally, and Shikamaru turned serious. "Alright, we need Jounin with good skills for security and as escorts, and I will get you to the third part and you could get to see that shinobi that you are curious about," he said, and Sasuke smirked as he continued. "But listen carefully, Uchiha, I like Temari and has for a long time. If you are trying to play with her." He was cut off as Sasuke spoke up. "I want to marry her and make her the Uchiha matriarch. I don't care if you like her or not, but she will be mine. I'll see to it and make her fall for me. Thanks for getting me in the exams. Now I'll leave. I have to train and I'm wasting precious time." He stopped as he saw Temari coming their way walking, and smirked. Shikamaru saw his trailing voice and followed his gaze to Temari and smiled at seeing how beautiful she'd become from the last time he saw her, and just as he was about to call her, Sasuke stood in front of her with a sly smile, trying to win her over and get her on a date. "Hey there, beautiful, let's." He was cut off as Temari shoved him away, and he fell onto his butt. "Get the hell out of my way, Uchiha," I has important matters to attend to than to listen to your pathetic flirting. She growled and kept walking without sparing him a glance as everyone around snickered quietly while Shikamaru was laughing wholeheartedly, making him furious as he glared at him. Oh, that's rich. The Uchiha just got burned in the middle of the street and she pushed you away without even sparing a glance. Way to go there, Casanova, you are well on your way to win her alright. He said, laughing, and Sasuke seethed at him and turned his gaze at the glorious back of Temari and watched her elegant walk and traced his eyes on her figure, smirking and licking his lips at her well-toned figure and the way she walked as he gazed at her firm back and well-toned legs. Yes, you will be mine. Just let me show you how great I am against that fiancé of yours and then I'll swipe you off your feet. He thought, smirking, and walked off, ignoring Shikamaru's laughs, and went to train with Kakashi. Shikamaru though wanted to go and talk to her but saw that she was in no mood for talking, then saw Gaara and Kankuro trying to catch up to her, and was confused but decided to let it be for the time being. He'll see it during the arrangements for the exams, he mused, and walked away with his hands in his pockets. Village gates. Hey Temari, wait up, we are coming to, shouted Kankuro, as he and Gaara walked up to her, and she didn't even spare them a glance and kept walking. Temari, he'll be fine. He was cut off as Temari spoke up, talking to herself. That idiot, I leave him alone for 5 days and he gets into a fight with not one, but 2 S-class shinobi, and takes them on, and that too on his own, then goes and gets injured. I swear when I see him I'll introduce him to a whole new world of pain, and introduce him to the joys of my fan that he has never before felt, and he'll pray I was one of those 2 that he fought after I am done with him. She ranted, jumping through the trees as Gaara silently listened, and Kankuro gulped, remembering the precious treatment of her fan, and prayed to the half-dead blonde to stay alive after she was done with him. Gaara saw her furious expression and decided to stay silent, knowing only one person could calm her down, and she was currently furious with him. Kankuro was trembling at the small amounts of killing intent his furious sister was leaking, and stayed silent as they trudged to the sand village silently. That's it to this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe to the next part. It's going to be more interesting, and also check out the other playlist. Hope you would like them too.